In a world where materialism often casts a shadow over life's true treasures, a beacon of wisdom shines brightly, inviting us to rediscover the essence of genuine wealth. True Wealth, by Orison Swett Marden, stands as a guide for those seeking deeper meaning, illuminating a path to the heart of human fulfillment and prosperity. Picture a realm where gold and jewels pale in comparison to the brilliance of inner abundance, a place where happiness is measured not by possessions, but by the richness of experiences, relationships, and aspirations. Marden, a trailblazer in the art of positive thinking and a champion of self-reliance, presents a compelling vision of a life defined by purpose and personal growth, transcending the confines of the material world. Through moving anecdotes and practical wisdom, Marden challenges conventional views of success, urging us to recognize that true wealth is found in nurturing our unique talents, spreading kindness, and living with intention. Each page serves as an invitation to unlock our untapped potential and embrace a life centered on creativity, resilience, and gratitude. Dear reader, immerse yourself in this transformative journey and reimagine your understanding of wealth. Let Marden's insights serve as a compass, guiding you toward a life rich in meaning and fulfillment. True wealth is not in the possessions you amass, but in the light you emanate by living authentically. Begin a journey that promises to reshape your life, reminding you that we are richest when we give, grow, and live from the depths of our souls. If you want to test a young person and determine whether nature has made them to be a king or a scholar, give them $1,000 and observe what they do with it. If they are born to conquer and command, they will quietly keep it until they are ready to use it when the opportunity arises. If they are born to serve, they will immediately spend it to satisfy their desires. To govern, be the man who builds and has no means to pay, who has a house from which he must flee. A young man buys what he needs, and soon he will sell what he needs. Set aside age and the desire to save as long as you can. No morning sun lasts the whole day. Franklin, whatever your talents, whatever your prospects, never speculate on the possibility of a palace that you might need as a provision for a common asylum. What do you do with all those books or that library? Which is like a cigar a day, that was the answer. What do you mean? I mean that when you bothered me so much about the idea of becoming a man and learning to smoke, I had just read the story of a young man who bought books with the money others would have spent on smoke, and I thought I'd try doing the same. Do you remember I said I had to allow myself 1 cigar a day? Yes, well, I never smoked. I just set aside the price of a 5-cent cigar each day, and as the money accumulated, I bought books. In fact, these are the books you see over there. You mean these books only cost that much? There are books that are worth dollars, yes, I know. I was missing 6 years of education when you convinced me to become a man. I set aside the money I told you about, which, of course, at 5 cents a day amounted to $18.25 per year, or $109.50 over 6 years. I bought those books thanks to my savings from the cigar money. And if you had done as I did, you would now have saved far more than that, and would also be in business. If a man starts at the age of 20 and saves 26 cents every day of work, investing at 7% compound interest, he will have $32,000 by the age of 70. 20 cents a day is not an unusual expense for beer or cigars, but in 50 years, that will easily amount to $20,000. Even saving $1 a week from adulthood would give $1,000 for each of the last 10 years of life. What nurtures a vice will raise 2 children. Who does not feel honored by their relationship with Dr. Franklin, whether as a citizen or compatriot, or even as belonging to the same race? Who does not feel a certain personal pride for that frugality in his youth that laid the foundation for so much skill and generosity in his maturity, for that wise discrimination in his spending that kept the culture of the soul in absolute supremacy over the pleasures of the senses, for that consummate mastery of the great art of living, which impregnated his practical wisdom in all the affairs of Christendom and made his name immortal? However, how few among us would not squander or even ridicule and scorn a young person who followed Franklin's example? Washington examined the smallest expenses of his household, even when he was President of the United States. He understood that without economy, no one can be rich, and with it, no one needs to be poor. Napoleon himself examined his household bills, detected overcharges and errors. Unfortunately, Congress can pass no law to remedy the vice of living beyond one's means. "We ruin ourselves," says Colton, not because of what we truly want, but because of what we believe we want. Therefore, never go abroad to seek your desires. If they are real, they will return home to find you. For he who buys what he does not want will soon end up wanting what he cannot buy. I hope there will be no further sales, exclaimed Horace Walpole, for I have not a square inch of space left, nor a penny. A woman once bought an old door plate with the name Thompson because she thought it might come in handy someday. The habit of buying what we don't need just because it's cheap encourages extravagance. Many have ruined themselves by buying good deals. Barnum tells the story of one of his friends whose wife wanted a new elegant sofa, which ended up costing $30,000. When the sofa arrived at the house, matching chairs had to be bought, then buffets, rugs, tables, and so on through all the furnishings. Eventually, the house itself was judged too small and outdated for this set, so a new house was built to match the sofa. In this way, added my friend, an expense of $30,000 was caused by this single sofa, leading to additional costs in the form of servants, baggage, and necessary expenses to maintain a good establishment, an annual expense of $11,000, and a habit of extravagance that constantly threatened my prosperity. Cicero said that not having the habit of buying is having an annuity. Many are swept away by the habit of buying good deals. Here's something incredibly cheap. Let's buy it. Does it serve you any purpose? Not yet, but one day it will surely be useful. Annual income, £20. Annual expenses, £19.06. Result, happiness. Annual income, £20. Annual expenses, £20.06. Result, misery, said Micawber. Hunger, rags, cold, hard labour, contempt, suspicion, and unjust reproach are unpleasant, said Horace Greeley, but debt is infinitely worse than all of these. If I only had 50 cents a week to live on, I would roast corn before owing anyone $1, said Greeley. Finding a use for people or things that are currently wasted in life must be the glorious work of the next generation of men, and what will most contribute to their enrichment. Saving on trivialities or whims is not economy. It must be done with management. Let us learn the true meaning of economy. Economy is a noble and human enterprise, a sacrament, especially when its purpose is great, when it involves the prudence of simple tastes, when it is practiced for freedom, for love, or for devotion. Much of the economy we see in homes is of vile origin, and it is better kept out of sight. The dried corn eaten today to have a roast chicken for Sunday dinner is a baseness, but the dried corn and a house with a single room to be free of disturbance, calm and docile to what the mind says, ready for the smallest mission of knowledge or goodwill that is frugality for gods and heroes. Like many other children, P.T. Barnum earned pennies by driving his father's oxen, but unlike many others, he invested his earnings in trinkets which he sold to others at every fair, thus turning his pennies into dollars. The eccentric John Randolph once jumped from his seat in the House of Representatives and exclaimed in a sharp voice, "Mr. Speaker, I have found it." Then, in the silence that followed this strange exclamation, he added, "I have found the philosopher's stone. It's pay as you go." In France, in all social classes, both men and women study and practice domestic economy. And there, as many travelers affirm, people live with a third of the expenses of the English or Americans, because they know how to prepare tasty dishes from leftovers that others would throw away and cook only what is needed for the day. There, culinary art is on the same level as the fine arts, and a great cook is as honored and respected as a sculptor or painter. As a result, as former Secretary Macaulay believes, a French village of 1,000 inhabitants could live luxuriously on the scraps from one of our great American hotels, and I believe the entire population of France could be fed with the food wasted in the United States. Professor Blood, who spent several years in the United States, sadly observes that here, where local markets rival the best in Europe, it is truly regrettable how many live as they do. There are thousands of modest families who have never eaten a truly good loaf of bread, nor tasted a properly cooked steak, nor shared a well-prepared meal. Many believe economy consists of saving cheese rinds and candle stubs, saving 2 cents on laundry, and indulging in all kinds of petty meanness. But economy is not meanness. It is equally unfortunate that such people limit their economy to a single aspect. They believe they are extraordinarily frugal by saving a half-cent where they should spend 2, while imagining that they can afford to waste elsewhere. Punch, speaking of such people with fixed ideas, says they are like the man who bought a herring for a penny for his family's dinner and then hired a 4-horse carriage to take them home. I have never known a man who succeeded by practicing this kind of economy. True economy is always ensuring that income exceeds expenses, wearing old clothes a little longer if necessary, doing without a new pair of gloves, living on simpler meals if needed so that whatever the circumstances, unless an unforeseen accident occurs, there is always a surplus. A penny here and a dollar there, placed at interest, accumulate, and that's how the desired result is achieved. If only I could write a single word in gold letters across the entire sky. Savings account, said Reverend William Marsh. The savings accounts in Boston hold $130 million in deposits, most saved bill by bill. Josiah King said that it's the all-purpose women who built the majority of the palaces on Bacon Street. Nature uses meticulous economy, says Emerson, reusing everything wasted today to create the world of tomorrow. Not a grain of sand is superfluous for display in its expenditures. In its public works, it overwhelms us with its abundance, but we cannot drop a single hair or nail without it immediately taking it to integrate into its general reserves. The flowers and foliage of last summer decompose in the fall, only to enrich the earth this year with other forms of beauty. Nature will not wait for our friends to see us unless we die at home. As soon as the breath leaves the body, it begins to decompose so that its parts can be reused in other creations. Distribute your needs in such a way that your means surpass them, says Voltaire. With £100 a year, I need no one's help. I can at least have my piece of bread and my freedom. But with £5,000 a year, I can hear my doorbell ring and fear my tyrannical master, servants whose wages I cannot pay. My exile may depend on the first person who will file a complaint against me for the meat that is already closer to my heart. A Shylock may already be dusting off his scales and sharpening his knife. Every man is in need if he spends more than he has. No man is in need if he spends less. I can manage my affairs so poorly that with £5,000 a year, I buy the worst miseries of poverty, terror and shame. I can also manage my affairs so well that with £100 a year, I buy the best blessings of wealth, security and respect. Live above yourself. Do everything as if the pyre were the sky and as if it were your last act before the last judgment. If you want to reach the heights, start from the bottom, says Pluvius Cyrus. What is man if his main good and the use of his time are nothing but sleeping and eating? A beast and nothing more. He who made us with such a vast mind, capable of looking ahead and behind, did not endow us with this divine ability and reason for them to rust within us, unused, says Shakespeare. Ambition is the spur that drives a man to struggle against fate. It is the incitement from heaven to aim for great goals and accomplish great things, says an anonymous author. It is not failure, but aiming too low, that is the crime. Strive to be the first in your vocation, whatever it may be. Let no one surpass you in pursuing good. Oh, that I might join the invisible choir of those immortal dead who live again in minds improved by their presence, who live in impulses driven by generosity, in acts of bold justice, in contempt for petty goals that end in themselves, in sublime thoughts that pierce the night like stars, and who, through their sweet persistence, push man to seek broader causes. George Eliot, Alexander, Caesar, Charlemagne, and I have founded empires, said Napoleon at St. Helena. But what have we founded our creations of genius upon? Only strength. Jesus Christ alone founded his empire on love, and even now millions of men die for him. I die before my time, and my body will be returned to the worms. Such is the fate of the one who was called the great Napoleon. What an abyss between my deep misery and the eternal reign of Christ, who is proclaimed, loved, adored, and who extends over the whole earth. Do you call this dying? Is it not rather living? The death of Christ is the death of a God. No true man can live a half-life, said Philip Brooks, once he understands what a half-life is. The other half, the upper half, must haunt him. Idealism is but the vanguard of the spirit, and if the spirit is in good condition and normal, it is a prophecy that the realization can follow, said Horace Mann. If the certainty of future fame comforted Milton in his blindness, or encouraged Galileo in his dungeon, said Bulwer, what stronger and more sacred support will not be granted to him who has loved humanity as his brothers, who has dedicated his efforts to their cause, who has not sought but renounced his own glory, defying the present criticisms of men for their future benefit, and who has trampled on glory by the energy of benevolence. For him, there will be something more powerful than fame to soothe his sufferings and support his hopes. Rufus Choate wrote in his journal in September 1844, "If I live, all the narrow-minded minds that tremble at certain mental peculiarities will know and see a reasoner, a lawyer, and a businessman. I have read that none of the humblest races possess the muscle that allows a man to turn his eye toward the sky, although I am not anatomist enough to be certain of this fact." "Show me a contented slave," said Burke, "and I will show you a degraded man. These are truly the faithful who devote their entire life to improvement," mentions a writer. General Grant says of the Great Wall of China, "I think that with the labor dedicated to this wall, all the railroads of the United States, all the canals and roads, and most, if not all, of our cities could have been built." "The true benefactors of humanity," says Emerson, "are the men and women who can raise their fellow human beings above the world of corn and money, who make them forget their bank accounts and lead them to their higher selves, who can lift simple seekers of money into the intellectual realm, where they will cease measuring greatness and happiness in dollars and cents, who can make men forget their stomachs and rejoice at the banquet of being. Men do not err in seeking to advance," says Bishop, "but in judging what constitutes progress and what the right method is to achieve it. An ambition with conscience will always be a diligent and faithful engineer who will build the road and fill the abysses between it and eminent success through the most faithful and meticulous fulfillment of duty. The freedom to aim higher than what we are is only given to us when we have fully accomplished the duty of our current sphere. Thus, men must rise through their performance, not their discontent. This is the hidden and golden meaning of the command to be content in any sphere where one finds oneself. It is not the contentment of indifference, laziness, or ambitionless stupidity, but the contentment of faithful work. When men build the foundations of vast structures, they must work far below the surface, in unpleasant conditions, but each row of stones they lay raises them a little more. And in the end, when they reach the surface, they have laid such solid work beneath them that they no longer have to fear raising their walls to the highest floors, thus dominating the entire neighborhood. The man who shows that he is fit to go higher is the one who shows that he is faithful where he is. A man who does not do well in his current place because he aspires to be higher is neither fit to be where he is nor fit to be above it. He is already too high and must be placed lower. Do what is assigned to you. You cannot hope or dare too much. What a man does gives him his power. He is in himself. Do not waste your life in doubts and fears. Dedicate yourself to the task before you, well convinced that fulfilling the duties of this hour will be the best preparation for the hours or ages to come. Tradition says that when Solomon received the gift of an emerald vase from the Queen of Sheba, he filled it with an elixir that only he knew how to prepare. A drop of this elixir would extend life indefinitely. A dying criminal begged for a drop of the precious liquid, but Solomon refused to prolong a malevolent life. When good men asked for it, it was also refused, or they did not have it when it was promised, because the king either forgot or preferred not to open the vase to get a single drop. Finally, when the king fell ill and asked his servants to bring him the vase, he found that all the contents had evaporated. It is often the same with our hope, our faith, our ambition, our aspiration. A man cannot aspire if he looks downward. God did not create us with aspirations and desires for heights we cannot climb. Live upward. The unattainable still draws us to the summits of the mountains of life, to the atmosphere where great souls live, breathe, and exist. Even hope is only a promise of the possibility of its own realization. Life must be lived seriously. It is not a leisure game, it is not a farce for entertainment and forgetfulness. It is a severe reality, filled with duties, more so than the sky is with stars. One cannot have too much of that desire called aspiration, for although you may not reach your ideal, the efforts you make will bring only blessings, while the one who fails to achieve simple worldly goals is often devoured by the worm of disappointed ambition. The moment will come for everyone when the love of glory will be nothing more than a splendid mirage, when wealth will be vain, rank illusory, power dependent, and when all external advantages without inner peace will be a mere mockery of misery. The wisest men have been concerned with tearing selfish ambition from their hearts. Shakespeare regarded it as so close to vice that it needed extenuating circumstances to be transformed into virtue. Who has not noticed the power of love over a clumsy, neglected, aimless, and lazy man? He becomes gentle, chaste in his speech, energetic. Love brings forth poetry in him. It is only an idea, a feeling, and yet what magic it has wrought. Nothing visible has touched this man, and yet he is completely transformed. Ambition does no less than transform the human being, for a woman eager for glory can persist where a man just as determined would falter. She despises happiness and laziness, welcomes work and difficulties, and even shakes kingdoms to satisfy her dominant passion. Simple ambition has driven many men to a life of eminence and usefulness. Its highest manifestation, aspiration, has taken them beyond the stars. If the goal is correct, life in its details cannot be very wrong. The heart must inspire what the hands accomplish, otherwise the work will be poorly done. The hand cannot reach higher than the heart. But do not strive to reach impossible goals. You have the full potential to grow, but not necessarily to become a king. How many presidents of the United States or prime ministers of England are elected during a man's lifetime? What if 1,000 young men set their sights on becoming president or prime minister? As long as these rewards are within your reach, remember that your will must be immense and your qualifications must be of the highest level. Otherwise, you cannot hope to attain them. Too many people lull themselves with ambitions that exceed their ability to achieve them, or torment themselves with aspirations completely disproportionate to their capacity for execution. One can confidently hope to become eminent in usefulness and power, but only to the extent that one builds oneself on a solid foundation of self-development. In general, ambitious specialists in science tend to become narrow and one-sided. Darwin loved poetry and music when he was young, but after dedicating his life to science, he was surprised to find Shakespeare boring. He said that if he could live his life again, he would read poetry and listen to music every day, so as not to lose the ability to appreciate these things. God does not ask man if he will accept life. It is not a choice. He must accept it. The only choice is how he will do so. When I discovered that I was black, said Dumas, I resolved to live as though I were white, and thus force people to look beyond my skin. In the collection of the Massachusetts Historical Society, there is a prospectus used by Longfellow for door-to-door work, on one of the blank pages of which are sketches of the verses of the Excelsior, which apparently evolved as he walked from house to house. Despising the honors most men cherish and seeking the truth, Plato said, I shall truly strive to live as virtuously as possible, and when I die, to die thus, and I invite all other men as much as I can, and you too, to this contest, which I assert is the greatest of all. Have you ever heard of a man who strove all his life, faithfully and individually, toward a goal without achieving it in one way or another? If a man constantly aspires, will he not eventually rise? Has a man tried heroism, magnanimity, truth, sincerity, and discovered that there was no advantage in that it was a futile effort? If the stone could glimpse the temple of which it will forever be a part, what patience it should have in feeling the hammer blows, knowing that its success is simply to be shaped according to the will of the master, exclaimed Philip Brooks. Man never reaches heights higher than his usual thought. It is not enough to occasionally rise on the wings of ecstasy toward the infinite. One must live there habitually. A great man is one who easily dwells in heights that others reach only occasionally, and with difficulty. Do not let the maxims of low prudence sung daily tarnish your high ambition or slow your aspirations. Hope does not climb step by step up the mysterious ladder whose top has never been seen by any eye. Although we do not find what hope promised, we are stronger for the ascent and gain a broader perspective on life, which compensates for the effort. Indeed, if we do not follow where hope calls us, we gradually slip down the ladder into despair. Strive to always remain at the top of your condition. A high level is absolutely necessary. I will show the ashes of my mind through the ashes of my opportunity, said Shakespeare. Perseverance is a virtue that wins every divine act and wrests success from the impenetrable peak of the steep danger, said William Harvard. Never speak of failure again. The one closest to success is the one who shows his blood, the one who pulls hardest on the oar and demonstrates the strength of his companion. As the men of Oxford say, It is the longest march that wins the campaign. It is the most persistent courage for 5 minutes that wins the battle. Even if your strength is less than your opponent's, you will surpass him if you continue longer and focus more. I know of no more undeniable sign of a sovereign mind than this tenacity of purpose that, through all changes of companions, parties, or fortunes, never changes. I do not lose an ounce of heart or hope, but I exhaust the opposition and reach my harbour. "Well done, Tommy Brooks," exclaimed his teacher with pleasant surprise when the school fool recited his text without omitting a word. The other boys had laughed when he stood up, expecting a humiliating failure. But when the rest of the class had tried, the teacher said that Tommy had been the best of all and gave him the prize. "Now tell me," she said, "how did you learn this poem so well?" "Please, miss, it was the snail on the wall who taught me to do it," replied Tommy. Upon hearing this, the other students burst out laughing, but the teacher said, "There's no need to laugh, children, because we can learn a lot from things like snails. How did the snail teach you, Tommy?" "I saw it climb up the wall little by little," replied the child. "It didn't stop or go back, but kept going, again and again. So I thought I would do the same with the poem, and that's how I learned it little by little without giving up. When the snail reached the top of the wall, I had learned the whole poem." "I can now reveal the secret of what is called good or bad luck," said Addison. "There are men who, assuming that Providence relentlessly opposes them, rise in the poverty of old age and misfortune in their lives. Luck seems to turn against them and in favor of others. One of them, with a good profession, lost his chance by spending his time fishing by the river. Another, with a good job, constantly burned his chance because of his temperament, which caused all his employees to leave him. Another, with a profitable business, lost his chance by being remarkably diligent in everything except his own affairs. Another, who remained constant in his work, was as constant as I am with the bottle. Another, honest and constant in his work, was mistaken because of his perpetual error in judgment, as he lacked discretion. Hundreds of people lose their chance by yielding to bloody expectations, trusting fraudulent men, and pursuing dishonest gains. Never has a man with a bad wife had good luck. I have never known a hard-working, prudent early riser concerned with his earnings, and strictly honest who complained about his bad luck. A good character, good manners, and hard work are impervious to the attacks of misfortune that fools dream of. But when I see a lazy man sneaking out of a grocery store late in the morning, hands in his pockets, hat brim raised and crown pushed down, I know he's had bad luck, because the worst luck is to be lazy, a good-for-nothing, or a drunkard. "You have a difficult subject," said Anthony Trollope to an artist at Niagara Falls who was trying to draw the mist from the waters. "All subjects are difficult," the artist replied, "for a man who wants to do well, but yours seems impossible," said another. "Let me finish my painting before you judge," protested the artist. "Tell Louise to devote herself to teaching. She will never succeed as a writer," her father said, handing her a rejected manuscript of a short story sent to James T. Fields, editor of the Atlantic Monthly, with this note. Miss Alcott replied, "Tell him I will succeed as a writer, and one day I will write for the Atlantic." Shortly afterward, she sent an article to the Atlantic and received a $50 check. With that money, she bought a second-hand rug for the living room, a hat for her sister, shoes and stockings for herself. Her father visited Longfellow some time later, and when Longfellow took the Atlantic and said, "I want to read Emerson's good poem on the bamboo flute," Mr. Alcott interrupted, delighted, and said, "It's my daughter Louise who wrote it." "Men speak as if victory is a matter of luck," said Emerson. "Work is the victory. Wherever you work, you find victory. There is no chance, no empty spaces. There is only one verdict that matters. If you have the verdict of the heart, the rest is assured. But if you need witnesses, they are at hand." "Young gentlemen," said Francis Wayland, "remember that nothing can resist daily work." Alexander the Great exclaimed to his discontented soldiers after a long campaign, "Go home and tell them you left Alexander to conquer the world alone." "We only pay our own bills, not those of private individuals," said the cashier at the Bank of England when a large note was presented by Ansel from Frankfurt in the name of Nathan Rothschild of London. "Private individuals," exclaimed Nathan when the cashier's comment was reported to him. "I will show these gentlemen what kind of private individual I am." 3 weeks later, he presented a £5 note at the bank's counter when it opened. The cashier counted 5 sovereigns, surprised that Baron Rothschild had bothered with such a small sum. The Baron examined each coin one by one, weighed them on the scale, as the law allowed, then put them in a small cloth bag and offered a second note, then a third, a fourth, a 50th, and a 1,000th note. Each time a bag was full, an employee took it away and filled another. In 7 hours, he had exchanged £21,000. With 9 employees from his household also engaged in this exchange, they had so caught the bank clerks off guard with $1,050,000 in notes exchanged that no one else could be served. The bankers laughed, but the next morning Rothschild returned with his 9 employees and several carts to carry off the gold, commenting, "These gentlemen refuse to pay my notes. I have sworn not to keep theirs. They can pay as they wish, but I inform them that I have enough to occupy them for 2 months. The smile disappeared from the faces of the bank officials when they thought of a bill of exchange for $55 million in gold they did not have. The next morning, newspapers announced that the Bank of England would pay the Russian bills of exchange, in addition to its own. "Well," said Barnum to a friend in 1841, "I am going to buy the American Museum." "Buy?" exclaimed the friend, astonished, knowing that the showman had not a penny. "With what are you going to buy it?" "With audacity, for I have neither money nor gold." Everyone involved in public spectacles in New York knew Barnum and knew he was broke. But Francis Olmsted, owner of the museum building, consulted numerous references, which spoke of a good showman who would keep his promises, and he agreed to back the purchase. Mr. Olmsted was to appoint a cashier at the door and to credit Barnum for all prior expenses, with an allowance of $50 a month to support his wife and their 3 children. Mrs. Barnum readily accepted this arrangement and suggested, if necessary, reducing household expenses to a little over $1 a day. 6 months later, Mr. Olmsted happened to enter the cashier's office around noon and found Barnum having lunch with some slices of bread and a bit of corned beef. "Is this how you dine?" he asked. "I haven't had a hot meal since I bought the museum except on Saturdays, and I intend not to do so again until I am freed from my debt." "You are safe, and you will pay for the museum before the end of the year," said Mr. Olmsted, patting him on the shoulder in approval. He was right, for within less than a year, Barnum had repaid every last penny of the museum's profits. A famous philosopher once said, "The favors of fortune are like steep cliffs, only eagles and reptiles reach the top." Lord Campbell, who became the President of the Supreme Court and Lord Chancellor of England and amassed a great fortune, began his life as an employee in a printing press. A little observation shows us that, generally speaking, the men who succeed the most in the world are the most useful and sensible members of society, those you can count on in times of emergency. They are solid men, resilient, the backbone and nerves of their communities, men you can always rely on. Those who are healthiest and happiest are usually people of ordinary intelligence and average abilities, but endowed with persistent and tireless industry. These are the ones who, after all, reap the rewards of life. They are men and women who remain steadily at work, who do not believe in geniuses, but know that if they accomplish something great, it will be thanks to shared work, persistent industry, and an unwavering goal in a single pursuit. Those who think of themselves as geniuses tend to scatter their efforts and thus waste their great energies, never accomplishing anything that matches their grand promises. Often, those who promise the most are the ones who deliver the least. Mrs. Frank Leslie often refers to the time when she lived in an attic without carpets while struggling to meet her husband's obligations. She managed to navigate 9 lawsuits and pay off all the debt. She personally manages her daily publications, signs all the checks and payment orders, makes all the contracts, proofs all the pages, and approves everything before it goes to the press. She has developed remarkable business skills that no one would have suspected. When a child was asked how he learned to skate, he replied, "By getting up every time I fell." Torres Weld, whose father died in a poorhouse and whose education was so rudimentary that he had to rewrite his letters several times before sending them, captivated the world with his genius through relentless perseverance and indomitable tenacity, which poverty, difficulties, and his discouraging father could not suppress. It's easy to tell me a young man distinguished himself with a brilliant first speech. He might continue along that path or be content with his first triumph, but show me a young man who didn't succeed at first and yet persevered. That's the one I'll support to do better than most who succeeded on their first try. "It was the last 3 days of Columbus's first voyage that counted," said Charles James Fox. All his years of struggle and study would have been for nothing had he given in to mutiny. Everything hinged on those 3 days. But what days? Macaulay said of Alexander the Great, "He was often defeated in battle, but he always succeeded in war." He could have said the same of Washington, and with the necessary adjustments, of all those who achieve great triumphs, whatever they may be. One of the greatest preachers of modern times, Lacordaire, failed repeatedly. Everyone said he would never become a preacher. But he was determined to succeed, and 2 years after his humiliating failures, he was preaching at Notre Dame in front of enormous congregations. Orange Judd is another remarkable example of success through courage. He earned his living working for farmers, carrying grain to the mill on his back, bringing the flour to his room, cooking it himself, milking cows for his daily litre of milk, and living on porridge and milk for months. He studied at Wesleyan University and completed a 3-year course at Yale. This same indomitable spirit allowed Franklin to dine on a small roll at the printing press with a book in hand, Locke to live on bread and water in a Dutch attic, Girolamo Savonarola to walk barefoot in the snow, hungry and poorly dressed, and Lincoln and Garfield to journey from a log cabin to the White House. Having a reputation for a strong, courageous, and tireless character is invaluable. It often discourages enemies and dissipates from the start opposition to one's endeavors, which would otherwise have been formidable. When you're at a standstill and everything seems to be going against you, to the point where you think you can't last another minute, never give up, for it's at that very moment that the tide will turn, said Harriet Beecher Stowe. Never despair, said Burke, but if you do, keep working in despair. Once, as Marshal Ney was heading into battle, he noticed his knees trembling. "You're shaking," he said to his men, "but you'd be shaking a lot more if you knew where I'm going to lead you." "Go for it, William," cried an old boxer in the middle of a fight. "Keep going. Never say it's over." There is a remarkable incident from the youth of George Law, who became one of New York's most prominent financiers. He was poor and friendless when he arrived in New York. One day, walking the streets, hungry and unsure of where his next meal would come from, he passed a building under construction. By unfortunate accident, one of the workers fell from the scaffolding and died at his feet. In his despair, Law asked if he could take the man's place, and he was given the job. Thus began the career of one of New York's wealthiest and most shrewd businessmen. Look at young Disraeli, from a hated and persecuted race without opportunities, forcing his way through the middle and upper classes until he rose to the top of political and social power. Ridiculed, mocked, and jeered in the House of Commons, he simply said, "The time will come when you will listen to me." That time came, and this young man with no future held the scepter of England for a quarter of a century. If impossibilities exist, they should have appeared somewhere between the birth and death of Kitto, the deaf beggar and master of Eastern knowledge. But Kitto did not encounter them. In the face of his imperial will and energy, they vanished. Kitto begged his father to take him out of the asylum, even if he had to live like the Hottentots. He said he would sell his books and use his handkerchief to gather about 12 shillings. He said he could live on blackberries, nuts, and wild turnips, and he was ready to sleep in a haystack. That is courage. What are impossibilities in the face of such a determined will? Patrick Henry expressed this determination, characteristic of great resolute men, when he said, "Is life so dear, or peace so sweet, that it must be purchased at the price of chains and slavery? Forbid it, Almighty God. I know not what course others may take, but as for me, give me liberty or give me death." Look at Garrison reading this notice in a Southern newspaper. The governor of Georgia will pay $5,000 for the head of W.L. Garrison. Look again, as a mob of ruffians drags him through the streets of Boston with a rope, he is taken to prison. Watch him calmly return to his work, unfazed, picking up where he left off. Note this epigraph in The Liberator, the type for which was set up in an attic on State Street in Boston. "I am serious. I will not err. I will not apologize. I will not back down an inch, and I will be heard." Garrison was heard. Ask a race largely freed by his efforts. Even the gallows set up in front of his door did not intimidate him. He spoke to a world that was not ready to listen with that burning word liberty, a word that would continue to resonate until it revealed its sweet secret to the last slave. At a time when abolitionists were dangerously unpopular, A crowd of sturdy Cape Cod fishermen made so much noise that all the scheduled speakers, except for Stephen Foster and Lucy Stone, fled from an outdoor platform. "You'd better run, Stephen," she said. "They're coming." "But who will look after you?" asked Foster. "This gentleman will look after me," she replied, calmly placing her hand on the arm of a burly rioter armed with a stick who had just jumped onto the platform. "What did you say?" stammered the surprised rioter, looking at the small woman. "Yes, I'll take care of you, and no one will touch a hair on your head." With that, he cut through the crowd, and at her request he placed her on a stump and stood guard with his stick, while she delivered a speech so compelling that the crowd ceased its violence and even collected $20 to reimburse Mr. Foster for the damage to his clothing during the riot. "Luck always waits for something to happen," said Golden. "Work, with keen eyes and strong will, always finds something. Luck stays in bed, hoping the postman will bring news of an inheritance. Work gets up at 6 a.m., and with a busy pen or a ringing hammer lays the foundations of success. Luck complains, work whistles. Luck relies on chance, work on character. There is no practical luck for those who do not make an effort and keep all their senses alert. What are called accidental discoveries are almost always made by those who are looking for something. A man has as much chance of being struck by lightning as of meeting with luck. There may be an element of luck in the amount of success that crowns the efforts of different men, but even here, it will generally be found that the sagacity with which efforts are directed and the energy with which they are pursued correspond quite precisely to the luck contained in the results achieved. The apparent exceptions almost exclusively concern individual ventures, while in the long term, the rule holds. Two equally qualified pearl divers dive together and work with the same energy. One finds a pearl while the other returns empty-handed, but let them persevere, and in 5, 10, or 20 years it will be seen that they have succeeded almost proportionally to their skill and industry. When Lincoln was asked by an anxious visitor what he would do if, after 3 or 4 years, the rebellion was not crushed, he replied, "There is no other alternative but to keep hitting." "It's in me, and it will come out," said Sheridan when told he would never be a speaker after failing at his first speech in Parliament. He became one of the greatest orators of his time. It takes great courage to fight for a lost cause, even without hope of victory, and to defend every inch of ground with as much perseverance and enthusiasm as if one were sure of victory. That is real courage. The world admires the man who never shrinks from unexpected difficulties, who faces his destiny with calm, patience, and courage, and who dies, if necessary, at his post. The president used resin in place of his sick lung and worked for 35 years after his burial was scheduled. Henry Fawcett replaced sight with courage and became the best postmaster general England ever had. Scott also replaced courage with sight and became one of America's greatest historians. Francis Parkman substituted courage for health and sight and became the greatest historian in America in his field. Thousands of men have replaced health, eyes, ears, hands, and legs with courage, and yet they have achieved wonderful success. Indeed, most of the great things in the world have been accomplished through tenacity and courage. You cannot keep a man down who possesses these qualities. He will make strides from his stumbling and rise to success. Courage and tenacity are not always displayed solely by poor young people who have no opportunities, as there are also many remarkable examples of courage, persistence, and true tenacity among well-born young people who have never had to struggle for their daily bread. Mr. Mifflin, who recently became the head of a famous publishing house, is a remarkable example of perseverance, determination, and courage. After graduating from Harvard and traveling abroad, he was determined, although he didn't need to work for a living, to get a position at Riverside Press in Cambridge. He approached the late Mr. Houghton and asked for a job. Mr. Houghton told him there were no openings, and even if there were, he didn't think a Harvard graduate with money and travel experience would be willing to start at the bottom and do the hard work of a boy for a small salary. Mr. Mifflin protested that he wasn't afraid of hard work and was willing to do anything and take any position, as long as he could learn the trade. But Mr. Houghton gave him no encouragement. Again and again, Mr. Mifflin returned to Riverside Press and insisted on his request, but in vain. Mr. Mifflin convinced his father to intervene on his behalf, but Mr. Johnson managed to dissuade him by claiming it would be very unwise for his son to try. But young Mifflin was determined not to give up. Finally, Mr. Houghton, impressed by his perseverance and courage, offered him a position that had been held by a boy for $5 a week. Young Mifflin threw himself into the work with such seriousness and showed so much courage and determination that Mr. Houghton soon called him into his office and offered him a raise to $9 a week. From the start, even though he lived in Boston, Mifflin was always at Riverside Press in Cambridge first thing in the morning and often stayed after everyone else had gone. One evening, Mr. Hodgson happened to enter after everyone had left, as he assumed, and was surprised to find Mr. Mifflin there, taking apart one of the presses. Of course, a young man like him was going to advance quickly. These are the young people who end up running businesses. It is victory after victory for the soldier, lesson after lesson for the student, strike after strike for the worker, harvest after harvest for the farmer, picture after picture for the painter, and mile after mile for the traveler. This is what guarantees what everyone desires most: success. Approach the task as much as possible and carry it out. Believe that you are made for the place you occupy and that no one else can fill it as well. With all your energy, wake up, electrify yourself, go toward the task. Learn once and for all to carry something through to its full extent, and you will become a hero. You will have a higher opinion of yourself, others will have a higher opinion of you, and the world in its heart admires the one who acts with determination and firmness. The best way to solve the conflict between capital and labor is through allopathic doses of cooperativism. At the highest flights of the soul, righteousness is never surpassed, and love is never surpassed. Emerson said, "A drop of masculine blood triumphs over the raging waves. Only virtue surpasses the pyramids. Its monuments will endure after the fall of Egypt." The young man believed he was born not for himself, but for the whole world. "Wherever a man goes, his character accompanies him," says an African proverb. The spirit of one can influence that of the masses, just as a sail unfurls under the breath of the wind, said Byron. "Say nothing you wouldn't say in front of everyone," replied King Leonidas of Sparta to Anistogoras, who had asked him to send away his little daughter, Gorgo, then 10 years old. It is known that it is much harder to convince a man to do wrong when his child is beside him. Gorgo sat at her father's feet and listened while the stranger offered more and more money for Cleomenes to help him become king in a neighboring country. The young girl didn't understand everything, but when she saw her father hesitate, she took his hand and said, "Father, go, or this stranger will lead you to act wrongly." The king walked away with his daughter, thus saving both himself and his country from shame. Character is power, even in a child. As an adult, Gorgo married the hero Leonidas. One day, a messenger brought a tablet sent by a friend imprisoned in Persia, but despite a careful examination, no word or line appeared on the wax surface. The king and his advisers concluded it was a prank. "Let me see it," said Queen Gorgo. After examining it, she exclaimed, "There must be a message beneath the wax." They scraped off the wax and found a warning from the Greek prisoner to Leonidas, saying that Xerxes was coming with a vast army to conquer all of Greece. Thanks to this warning, Leonidas and the other kings gathered their armies and stopped Xerxes' immense force, which, it was said, made the earth tremble as it marched. "I fear the prayers of John Knox more than an army of 10,000 men," said Mary, Queen of Scots. "The man behind the sermon, that is the secret of John Hall's power," said William M. Evers. In truth, if a man has no character behind him, nothing he possesses matters. Nature has inscribed a letter of credit on the face of certain men, honored wherever they appear. One cannot help but trust them. Their mere presence inspires trust. Character is credit. During the Great Monetary Panic of 1857, a meeting of the presidents of New York banks was held. When asked what percentage of cash had been withdrawn, some replied 50%, others up to 75%. But Mr. Taylor of Citibank said, "This morning we had $400,000 in deposits. This afternoon, we have $470,000. While other banks were poorly managed, the trust in Citibank under Mr. Taylor's leadership was so strong that people deposited what they had withdrawn from other banks. Character inspires trust. "There are no small countries," said Victor Hugo. "The greatness of a people is not measured by the number of its inhabitants, just as the greatness of an individual is not measured by their size. It is a tradition in England to seek the support of men of genius, but to follow the advice of men of character," said John Russell. "A handful of good life is worth more than a barrel of knowledge," said George Herbert. "I read," said Emerson, "that those who listened to Lord Chatham felt there was something greater in this man than all he said. It is often said that revolutions never retreat, and that today's fanaticisms are tomorrow's victories." "O Lord, we are defeated," exclaimed the general as Sheridan's army retreated before the victorious Early. "No, sir," replied Sheridan indignantly. "They are defeated, but this army is not." Drawing his sword, he raised it above his head and pointed to the enemy who was pursuing them. His bugle-like voice rose above the terrible noise, commanding a new charge. The ranks stopped, turned, and with the powerful sweep of the ocean beneath the storm's wing, they hurled themselves at the enemy. This is how the Confederate army was fiercely defeated. When war with France seemed imminent in 1798, President Adams wrote to George Washington, then a simple citizen retired at Mount Vernon, "We must use your name. If you allow us to use it, it will have more effect than many armies. Character is power." When Pope Paul IV learned of Calvin's death, he sighed and said, "The strength of that proud heretic was not in wealth or honors, but nothing could turn him from his path. Holy Virgin, with 2 servants like him, our church would soon rule both worlds." 1800 years ago, as night fell on the city of Pompeii, a mother sat at home watching over her 10-year-old son. The child had been sick for several days, his body weakened, his little limbs shriveled. One can imagine with what infinite anxiety she watched every movement of this beloved being. What happened, we know with remarkable precision. That evening, Vesuvius, the mountain that loomed over the bay, erupted, sending such clouds of pumice into the air that the streets and squares of Pompeii were soon filled, with the stones rising gradually to the windows. It was impossible to flee through the doors, and those who tried to escape climbed out of the first-floor windows, falling onto the sulphurous stones, but they could only travel a short distance before the poisonous vapors overwhelmed them, killing them quickly. After the stones, ashes fell, followed by a rain of hot water that turned the ashes into clay. Those who had fled during the fall of the stones were consumed, while those who remained to wait for the ashes were preserved by them, as the water then covered them. The mother of Pompeii we speak of opened the window of her house after thinking the fall of the stones had ended. Holding her child in her arms, she took a few quick steps, but overwhelmed by the sulphurous vapors, she collapsed just as the rain of ashes began to fall, quickly burying both mother and child. The hot water then became a mold, and the ashes and sun baked the clay to such hardness that it has endured to this day. Recently, the site where the mother and child rested was discovered. Liquid plaster was poured into the mold formed by their bodies, and then the mold was broken, leaving an intact statue. This poignant incident from the terrible tragedy of 18 centuries ago is thus preserved for the admiration and respect of posterity. The child's arms and legs showed a contraction and emaciation that could only have been caused by illness. Of the mother, only her right arm was preserved. It had fallen onto the ashes while the rest of her body was consumed. But her right hand still held the child's legs. On her arm were 2 gold bracelets, and on her fingers 2 gold rings, one with an emerald and the other with a cut amethyst. This moving illustration of maternal love is now housed in a museum in the famous city. One day, as I was sitting with Grant, General Fisk, a division general, recounts, a general entered, dressed in his uniform. He said, "Gentlemen, I have a good story to tell you. I don't think there are any ladies here." Grant replied, "No, but there are gentlemen." Mr. George W. Shields, speaking of this quality, said, "Another great trait of Grant's was his purity in every sense. I never heard him express or allude to anything improper in any way. He never said anything that I couldn't repeat in the presence of women." The writer has heard of several incidents illustrating his response to impure stories. One day, while Grant was attending a dinner for American gentlemen in a foreign city, the conversation turned to questionable subjects. Grant suddenly stood up and said, "Gentlemen, excuse me, I am leaving." When Attila, fueled by his conquests, appeared with his barbarian hordes before the gates of Rome in the year 452, only Pope Leo dared to go out to try to calm his fury. He was accompanied by just one magistrate. The Huns were intimidated by the fearless majesty of the unarmed old man, and they led him to their leader, whose respect for him was so great that he agreed not to enter the city, provided a tribute was paid. Wellington said that Napoleon's presence in the French army was equivalent to 40,000 additional soldiers, and Richter said of the formidable Luther that his words were half battles. "I do not know of any great man," said Voltaire, "except those who have rendered great services to humanity. Men are measured by what they accomplish, not by what they appear to be or possess." Francis Horner, a man from England of whom Sidney Smith said that the 10 Commandments were engraved on his forehead. The precious and unique light in which Horner's story is considered to inspire all young people with a righteous mind is as follows. He died at the age of 38, enjoying an influence greater than any other private man, admired, loved, respected, and mourned by all except the ruthless and the vile. No greater tribute was ever paid in Parliament to a deceased member. How was this accomplished? By his rank? He was the son of a merchant from Edinburgh. By wealth? Neither he nor any of his family ever possessed excess wealth. By his position? He held only one, and only for a few years, with no influence and a modest salary. By his talent? His was not brilliant, and he had no genius. Cautious and slow, his sole ambition was to be right. By his eloquence? He spoke calmly and tastefully, without any oratory that terrifies or charms. As for his manners, they were simply correct and pleasant. It was therefore through common sense, diligence, good principles, and a kind heart, qualities that no well-formed mind should despair of attaining, that he rose. This character, which propelled him, was not imprinted by nature but formed by himself, from elements that were not particularly refined. There were not many people in the House of Commons with more abilities and eloquence, but no one surpassed him in combining these qualities with moral value. Horner was born to show what moderate powers can achieve without any aid other than cultivation and kindness, even when these powers are deployed in the competition and jealousy of public life. In 100 years, what difference will there be between being rich or poor, noble or peasant? What difference can there be if you have done what is right or wrong? In a scene presented by Lord Stratford after the Crimean War, it was proposed that each person write on a paper the name of the person most likely to go down in history with renown. When the papers were opened, all contained the name of Florence Nightingale. Professor Blackie of Edinburgh University said to a class of young people, "Money is not necessary, power is not necessary, freedom is not necessary, even health is not the most necessary thing, but character is the only thing that can truly save us. If we do not save ourselves in this way, we are doomed." It has been said that when poverty is your inheritance, virtue must be your capital. This is why I had so much influence among my fellow citizens. I was just a poor speaker, never eloquent, often hesitant in choosing words, rarely correct in language, but I usually managed to get my point across, said Franklin, speaking of the influence of his integrity known to all. When a man's character disappears, everything collapses. All inner peace, all self-contentment vanish forever. He despises himself, is despised by his peers, tormented by shame and remorse without respite. He inevitably becomes a miserable and useless man, even if he is dressed in purple and fine linen and indulges in lavish feasts every day. It is better to be poor, reduced to begging, thrown into prison, or condemned to perpetual slavery, than to be deprived of a good reputation, or endure the pain and misery of consciously felt uselessness of character. Soon the time will come when, by the common consent of humanity, it will be deemed more honorable to have been John Ponce, putting new and beautiful souls into the ragged children of the neighborhood while mending his father's shoes, than to have sat on the British throne. The time has now come when, if Queen Victoria, during one of her magnificent progressions through her realms, encountered this queen more than American Miss Dix in her circumnavigation of charity among the insane, the former should kneel and kiss the hand of the latter, and the governor of over 100 million people should pay homage to the angel God sent to the maniacs. At your age, said an old man to a young one, position and wealth seem like lasting things, but at my age one sees that nothing endures except character. Several prominent clergymen were discussing the qualities of self-taught men. Each of them admitted to belonging to this class, except for a certain bishop who remained silent, absorbed by the banquet. The host insisted on making him speak and said to him, "Everyone at this table is a self-taught man except the bishop." The bishop quickly replied, "I am not yet made," and this response contained a profound truth. As long as life lasts, with its discipline of joys or sorrows, or with its opportunities to do good or evil, our character is formed and set. Milton said, "He who wants to write heroic poems must make his whole life a heroic poem." We are responsible for our thoughts, and if we cannot dominate them, mental and moral excellence is impossible. He said it well, "Let whoever puts his whole heart into doing what is right, nothing else, and it will not be long before his forehead is marked by all that constitutes a heroic expression. A noble indignation, a noble self-control, great hopes, great pains, perhaps even the imprint of the martyr's crown of thorns." James Martineau said, "May God inspire a competition between our practice and our thoughts. If we let a contradiction settle between them, he immediately begins to abolish it, and if reason does not rise to the height of reason, then it must submit to will." When I say that directing your intellect, as Sidney Smith said, is to love knowledge with a great love, a passionate love, as enduring as life itself, what am I saying except that you must love innocence, love virtue, love purity of conduct? It is not only what, if you are rich and powerful, would claim the blind justice that placed you there, but it is what, if you are poor, will make your poverty respectable, and make the proudest feel it is unjust to mock the smallness of your fortune. Love what comforts you, adorns you, and will never abandon you. What will open to you the realms of thought and the boundless regions of conception as a refuge against the cruelty, injustice, and pain the world may hold for you, and what will make your motives generally noble and honorable, leading you to feel 1,000 noble scorns the moment the idea of baseness or fraud would appear. The Arabs express this with a parable that embodies, as is their custom. In the story, it is said that King Roth once summoned his 3 sons to his presence and ordered that 3 sealed urns be presented to them. One urn was made of gold, another of amber, and the third of terracotta. The king asked the eldest of his sons to choose the urn that seemed to contain the treasure of greatest value. The eldest chose the golden urn on which was inscribed the word Empire. He opened it and found it filled with blood. The second son chose the amber urn on which was inscribed the word Glory. He opened it and discovered it contained the ashes of great men who had marked the world. The third son took the only urn left, the terracotta one. He found it almost empty, but at the bottom the potter had inscribed the word God. "Which of these urns weighs the most?" the king asked his courtiers. The ambitious men answered that it was the golden urn. The poets and conquerors said it was the amber urn, and the wise ones affirmed that it was the empty urn, for a single letter of God's name weighs more than the entire globe. We are of the opinion of the wise, and believe that the greatest things are great in proportion to the divinity they contain. Although genius always evokes admiration, character is what ensures respect. The former is more the product of the brain's power, the latter of the heart's power. In the long run, it is the heart that commands life. Geniuses stand before society in relation to their intellect, as men of character do in relation to their conscience. While the former are admired, the latter are followed. Although this may seem commonplace, the fulfillment of duty embodies the highest ideal of life and character. There may be nothing heroic in this, but the common fate of men is not heroic, and although the permanent sense of duty keeps a man in his highest attitudes, it also supports him in managing the ordinary affairs of daily existence. The most influential virtues are those most needed for daily use. They are those that marry best and last longest. We can always understand and appreciate the best and truest character of a man by the way he behaves with those closest to him and by his handling of the seemingly common details of daily duty, rather than by his public exhibition as an author, speaker, or statesman. Intellectual culture has no necessary link to purity or excellence of character. On the contrary, a condition of comparative poverty is compatible with character in its highest form. A man may possess only his industry, frugality, and integrity, and yet be placed at the top of true rank. Character is a property, the noblest of possessions. It is an inheritance in the general goodwill and respect of men. Those who invest in it, even if they do not become rich in the goods of this world, will find their reward in the esteem and reputation justly and honorably acquired. Without principles, a man is like a boat without a rudder or compass, left to drift, tossed in every direction by every wind that blows. What a contrast there is between the lives of Bacon and More. Bacon sought the position with as much desire as More avoided it, and he used such solicitude to obtain it that More suffered to accept it. And each, once in office, was faithful to his character. Bacon, simple as More, was ostentatious. More was as incorruptible as Bacon was venal. More squandered his personal fortune in his office, and Bacon spent the salary of corruption on it. Both left their post poor in material goods, but while More was rich in honor and good deeds, Bacon was poor in everything. Poor in riches for which he traded his integrity, poor in God because he sacrificed his peace, poor in the presence of the useless, covered in shame among the people, trusting his fame to posterity, from which posterity can only say that the wisest man was the adviser to the most foolish king. But such a king had a certain majesty compared to the official director of his conscience. Both More and Bacon served a great purpose for the world. More illustrated the beauty of holiness. Bacon exposed the infinity of science. Bacon became the prophet of intellect, More the martyr of conscience. One enlightens our minds with the light of knowledge, but the other inflames our hearts with the love of virtue. All have read about the proud Egyptian king who ordered the construction of a colossal staircase in his new palace and was upset to discover that he needed a ladder to go from one step to the next. The legs of a king are as short as those of a beggar. Thus, a prince's ability to enjoy the pleasures of life is no greater than that of a beggar. All that is precious in this world can be obtained without anything in exchange. Genius, beauty, health, piety, love cannot be bought or sold. The richest man on earth would offer a fortune in vain to be able to write a verse like Milton or compose a melody like Mozart. You can summon all the doctors, but they cannot give you the sweet and healthy sleep that the tired worker gets without price. No man should then consider himself a proprietor. He only possesses the breath that passes through his lips and the idea that floats in his mind, and that breath can be taken away by the sting of a bee, and that idea may even truly belong to another. We live in facts, not in years, thoughts or breaths, feelings or numbers on a dial. We should count time by the beats of the heart. The one who lives the most, who thinks the most, who feels the most, who acts the best is the one whose heart beats the fastest and lives the longest. I have gout, asthma and 7 other diseases, but otherwise I'm very well, said Sydney Smith. The innate genius of some people is equivalent to genius itself. White sits, trembling, in the smile of fortune, taking his joy with a contained and doubtful breath. This other person, constantly ravaged by hunger, laughs in the face of death. T.V. Aldrich, there is no life more real than the joyful life. Addison, next to virtue, pleasure is what we most lack in this world. Agnes Strickland, the joy in each person's work is the accomplished tool. Philip Brooks, joy is the mainspring in the quiet, infinite mechanism of nature. Joy turns the dazzling wheels that spin in the great clock of creation. Schiller, he is stiffer than a poker, said a friend of a man whom no one could seduce or tempt into a smile. Stiffer than a poker, exclaimed the other. Why would I give him an example of a poker? Even Christians are not celebrated for entering into the joy of their Lord. It is said that Pascal would not allow himself to be aware of the taste of his food. He forbade all condiments and spices, no matter how much he desired or needed them, and in fact he died because he forced his sick stomach to accept a certain amount of food at each meal, no more, no less. Whatever his appetite was at that moment, or his total lack of appetite, he wore a belt with iron spikes which he would push into his body whenever he thought he needed to. He would be offended and upset if anyone among those who listened to him said they had seen a beautiful woman. He reprimanded a mother who allowed her children to kiss her, and he was harsh toward a loving sister who devoted herself to his comfort. He assumed his artificial harshness of manner with the express intention, as he admitted, of disgust from his sister's affection. All this stemmed from the simple principle that earthly pleasure was incompatible with religion. We must struggle against every influence that tends to depress the spirit, as we would against the temptation of crime. A depressed spirit prevents the free action of the diaphragm and the expansion of the chest. It hinders bodily secretions, interferes with blood circulation in the brain, and disrupts all the functions of the body. Scrupulosity and tuberculosis often follow prolonged mental depression. This fatal murmur heard in the upper lobes of the lungs in the early stages of tuberculosis often follows depressed minds after great tragedy or sorrow. Suicide victims are almost always found in a depressive state due to exhaustion of vitality, loss of nerve energy, dyspepsia, worry, anxiety, cares, or grief. Joy is God's medicine, said a wise writer. Everyone should bathe in it. Dark worry, gloom, anxiety, the rust of life should be cleansed with the oil of joy. It is better than enamel. Every man should rub himself with it. A man without joy is like a cart without springs, upon which every stone he meets causes an unpleasant jolt. A joyful man is like a cart with springs, upon which one can travel the most difficult roads without feeling anything but a pleasant swaying movement. I spoke to you, said Saudi, about the Spaniard who always wore glasses when he went to eat cherries so that the fruit seemed larger and more tempting. In the same way, I make the most of my joys, and although I do not turn my eyes away from my problems, I pack them into the smallest compass I can for myself and never let them disturb others. We all know the power of good humor to magnify everything. Icelanders, who live in the midst of cold and desolation from an almost perpetual winter, tell travelers that Iceland is the best land where the sun shines. I suppose you're on the shady side of 70, someone asked an old man. No, on the sunny side, because I am on the side closest to glory, was his response. A joyful man is above all a useful man. He does not get upset and does not have a biased view of men and things. He knows that there is much misery, but that misery should not be the rule of life. He sees that in all states, people can be joyful. Lambs jump, birds sing and fly joyfully, puppies play, kittens are full of joy. The whole air is filled with insects that stir and rejoice, that everywhere good outweighs evil, and that all evil has its compensatory balm. Lord Peterborough said that Bishop Fenelon was a delightful name, and that I should avoid it so that it would not make me a Christian. The historian never said anything truer. To be happy, a person must be joyful and happy, not gloomy and melancholic. A propensity for hope and joy is a real wealth, fear and sadness a real poverty. Dr. Johnson once commented with his point and parentheses that the habit of seeing the bright side of every event was better than having an income of £1,000 a year, but Hum valued even more the value in dollars and cents of joy. He said that he would prefer to have a joyful disposition and always be inclined to see the bright side of things than to own an estate with £10,000 a year. We have not fulfilled all our duties if we have not fulfilled that of being pleasant. If one or two words make a man happy, he must truly be an unhappy person, for it is like lighting another man's candle with your own, which loses nothing of its brilliance for what the other gains. The sensible young man, at least in theory, chooses for his wife the one who is capable of running his house, of being the mother of his strong children, the one who faces the experiences of life with a gentle temperament. It is impossible to imagine a pleasant home with a wife, mother, or sister with a temperament as crossed as his own presidential genius. And it is a rule with exceptions that good appetite and deep sleep induce kindness. If, with these advantages, a girl, woman, boy, or man is still brusque or surly, why should this be due to their total depravity? There are things they must not do. They must not dose themselves or study themselves. Their cases must not suddenly plunge into a vigorous army. Moderation is a safe rule to begin with, and in fact to maintain moderation in study, work, exercise, in everything except fresh air, good simple food, and sleep. Few people have too much of this. The average girl at home can find no healthier exercise than participating in the lightest domestic chores. This type of exercise has an object, an interest, and a utility that elevates it above simple exercise. Add to this a joyful game with younger brothers and sisters, a light daily walk, the use for a few minutes twice a day of silent bells in a cool and ventilated room, and it is safe to predict a constant advancement toward that ideal state of being where we forget our bodies and simply enjoy. It is not work that kills men, says Bishop. It is worry. Work is healthy. One cannot overload a man beyond what he can bear, but worry is rust on the blade. It is not movement that destroys machinery, but friction. Helen Hunt says that there is a sin that seems to be everywhere, and that everyone underestimates and glosses over too much in character assessments. It is the sin of worry. It is as common as air, as speech, so common that unless it rises above its usual monotony, we don't even notice it. If we observe any ordinary gathering of people, how many minutes will pass before someone worries, that is, complains more or less about something or another that probably everyone in the room, in the car, or at the street corner knew in advance, and that probably no one can avoid? Why say something about it? It is cold, it is hot, it is humid, it is dry. Someone missed an appointment, cooked a meal poorly. Stupidity or bad faith somewhere caused discomfort. There are so many things to worry about. It is truly astonishing the amount of inconveniences and discomforts one can encounter in the course of daily life, even in the simplest, if one keeps a close eye on this aspect of things. Some people always seem at home, deformed, discordant, rather than beautiful, harmonious, and radiant. We are born for problems like sparks that rise, but even for sparks that fly upward, in the darkest of smoke, there is a blue sky above, and the less time they waste on the way, the faster they will reach it. Worry is all the time lost along the way. There are two things we should never worry about: what we cannot avoid and what we can avoid. It is better to find a fault in oneself than 10 in one's neighbor. It is not today's problems, but those of tomorrow, those of next week, and those of the following year that block our minds and crease our faces. All the men we meet seem to have come out to ask for a loan with a bundle of problems in hand, says a French lady driving in New York. The pendulum of a certain clock will start calculating how many times it should swing back and forth in the coming week and month. Then, looking further into the future, it does the calculation for a year, etc. The pendulum gets frightened and stops. Do the work of one day at a time. Do not worry about tomorrow's problems. Most of life's problems are borrowed problems that never come. Like any healthy action, whether physical, intellectual, or moral, it mainly depends on joy, and like any activity, whether ploughing or dying on the pyre, it must be done with a joyful spirit. Exploring the sources and conditions of this virtue, the most vigorous, stimulating, and creative, can be as useful as the exposition of any prudent art subject or system, says E.P. Wiper. Christ, the great master, did not lock himself away with monks far from the temptation of the great outside world. He did not teach a long and gloomy theology. He taught the gospel of the church and good cheer. His doctrines are illuminated by sunlight and flavored with the flowers of the field. The birds of the sky, the beasts of the field, and the happy, playful children are part of it. True piety is joyful like the day. Kramer encourages his martyr brothers, and Latimer walks with his face beaming with joy toward the pyre, lifting the spirits of his companions and seasoning all his sermons with pleasant anecdotes. Nothing can replace the lack of sun on peaches, said Emerson, and for knowledge to be valuable, it must have the joy of wisdom. In response to the question of how we will overcome temptation, a famous writer said that joy is the first, second, and third thing. The habit of joy that allows a person to transform apparent misfortunes into true blessings is a fortune for a young man or woman who has just crossed the threshold of active life. He who has gotten into the habit of seeing the bright and happy side of things sees glory in the grass, the sun in the flowers, sermons in the stones, and good in everything. He has a great advantage over the chronic dyspeptic who sees nothing good in anything. His habitual thought sculpts his face into beauty and touches his manner of being with grace. We often forget that the priceless charm that assures us all these desirable gifts is within our reach. It is the charm of a sunny temperament, a talisman more powerful than the season, more precious than gold, more desirable than fine rubies. It is a fragrance whose scent fills the air. Valparaiso, say these enthusiasts, you hear them say what they fully believe. Blessed are they, that all countries are beautiful, all dinners majestic, all paintings magnificent, all high mountains, all beautiful women. When one of them returned from his trip to the countryside after a hard year of work, he always found the coziest nooks, the cheapest, most acclaimed houses, the warmest, and the best views and dinners. But in the other case, it's really different. He was always positively robbed, saw nothing. His landlady was a harpy, his room was unsanitary, and the lamb was so tough he couldn't bite into it. He continues to talk about the sun and its glory, says Isaac Walton, about the fields, meadows, streams they saw, the birds they heard. He wonders what the blind and deaf would give to see and hear what they saw. About the sunny face of Lord Holland, Roger said that he always comes to breakfast like a man who has had a sudden good fortune. But through the glorious glasses he wears, the kind man, oh, these wonderful glasses, finer than cloud-lauren crystal, which cast a sunlit vision on everything and make the heart rejoice in the little things and thank for the small mercies. These glasses were the honest inheritance of Isaac Walton, who, upon returning from a fishing expedition on the River Lee, burst into small conversations of thanksgiving like this. While we walk to the house under the cool shade of this honeysuckle hedge, let us mention some thoughts and joys that have possessed my soul since we met, and that for our current happiness to seem greater and make us more grateful, I beg you to consider with me how many people are right now under the torment of gout or toothache, and from this we have been freed. And let me tell you that every misery I lose is a new blessing. The hypochondriac who cares for his arm never looks to the future with joy, but wallows in his invalid's chair and croaks like a raven foretelling misfortune. He says, "You will never succeed. These things always fail." The jailer of India, whose prayer is homicide and whose offering is the body of a victim, is melancholic. The villain who awaits crushing a victim's skull and preparing a vacuole for his gods is as dark as fear and death. The melancholy of Eastern Jews just after their Black Fast and the bad mood of monks and nuns after their Fridays and Wednesdays are very noticeable. It is the reward that a proud nature reaps from the world for its selfish sacrifice. Melancholy is the black bile that the Greeks believe prevented and impregnated the bodies of such people, and fasting undoubtedly produces it. Once I spoke with a Rosicrucian about the great secret. Addison spoke of it as a spirit living in an emerald, transforming everything around it into the highest perfection. "It makes the sun shine," he said, "and shows the water as a diamond, irradiates all metals and enriches lead with the property of gold, transforms smoke into flame, flame into light, and light into glory. And a single ray dissipates the pain and worry of the person on whom it falls. It was then that I discovered that his great secret was content. My crown is in my heart, not in my head. It is not adorned with diamonds or Indian stones. You cannot see my stone. It is called content. It is a crown that kings rarely value. Shakespeare, however, with a heart always benevolent, a kind and joyful spirit, has perpetual spring in his mind and around him. Make a May, Thackeray, lift your head. Believe deeply in yourself so that you may be meticulous and achieve great things. Tennyson said that there is a faith that can move mountains. It is the faith in one's own power. Mary Epner is the one who said not to discourage self-confidence. It is, of all qualities, the greatest of true humility. It takes a divine man to exhibit something divine. Trust yourself. Every heart vibrates to that iron string. Accept the place that divine providence has found for you, the society of your contemporaries, the connection of events. Great men have always done so. Nothing is finally sacred except the integrity of our own mind. Emerson says this is the most important. Be true to yourself, and as the night to the day, you cannot be false to anyone. Shakespeare, yes, said that. A half-drunk man in a basement, a young girl, a visitor to the parish, says, "I am a hard man and a drunkard. I just got out of prison, and my wife is starving. But that does not give you the right to enter my home without knocking to ask questions." Another jealous young girl declared in a reform club in New York City that she would always visit the poor in her car with the emblem on the door and liveried servants. "It gives me authority," she said. "Listen to my words with more respect." The Fury to Barbara, who founded the Home for Degraded Sailors and Drunks in London, used other means to gain their influence. She would say, taking the poor beggar by the hand when he arrived at her door, "I too, just like you, am one of those for whom Christ died. We are brothers, and we will help each other." An English artist devoted himself to painting a scene in the slums of London. He asked for permission from the Chelsea Poor Law Guardians to sketch some of the picturesque indigents who were in the workhouse at that time as types of need and misery. The council refused permission, arguing that a man does not cease to have self-respect and rights because he is poor, and that his misfortunes should not be exhibited to the world. This incident helps to shed light on the troubling issue of the relationship between the rich and the poor. Benevolent but thoughtful people who dedicate themselves to the task of supporting the needy often forget that these unfortunate people have self-respect, rights, and sensitive feelings. When someone tells Diogenes that he is ridiculed, he answered, "But I am not ridiculed. Only the person who feels the ridicule and is embarrassed by it is ridiculed." Dr. Franklin often said that if a man makes a sheep of himself, wolves will eat him. It is no less true that if a man is supposed to be a sheep, it is very likely that wolves will try to eat him. "O God, assist our camp," prayed Prince Anil, a general in the service of Prussia, before going into battle. "Or at least do not assist the enemy and let me have the result." "If a man possesses the consciousness of what he is," said Shelley, "he will soon learn also what he must be. whether he has a theoretical respect for himself, and then a practical respect will follow. A person under the firm persuasion that they can dominate resources practically possesses them. Humility is part of wisdom, and it is most appropriate in men, said Kossuth, but no one discourages self-confidence. It is, of all qualities, the greatest of true manliness. Broad wrote, "A tree must be rooted in the earth before it can give flowers or fruit. A man must learn to stand tall on his own feet, to respect himself, to be independent of charity or accident. It is only on this basis that a worthwhile intellectual culture superstructure can be built." "I think he is an extraordinary man," said John Jota English, speaking of Gruber Cleveland. While the Senate was in session to invest Hendricks in his duties, I had the opportunity to study Cleveland as he sat there like a sphinx. He occupied a seat just in front of the vice president's desk, and from where I was sitting, I had a clear view of him. I wanted to know if it was possible to determine what kind of man the one who had defeated us and taken the government's patronage for democracy was. We had a new master, so to speak, and a Democrat, and I studied him with great curiosity. He sat there, a man, the President of the United States, beginning to govern the destinies of 60 million people who, less than 3 years ago, had been an obscure lawyer barely known outside of Rurry County, locked in a filthy office above a stable. He had been the mayor of Buffalo at a time when a crisis in his affairs demanded a courageous head and a firm hand, and he provided them. The little prestige he earned put him in a position to be the Democratic candidate for governor, and there was a time, while his luck still accompanied him, when the state Republican Party was torn by dissent. He was elected with an unprecedented majority of nearly 200,000 votes. Years later, his party proposed him as a candidate for the presidency, and he was elected. He sat there, this man before me, completely unperturbed by the pomp of the occasion, quietly waiting to play his role in the drama, like an actor waiting for his turn to appear on stage. This was his first visit to Washington. He had never seen the Capitol and knew absolutely nothing about the machinery of government. Everything was a mystery to him. But a stranger, not understanding the circumstances, would have imagined that the procedures unfolding before him were part of his daily life. The man did not move a muscle, nor did he blink an eye, nor make a movement during the entire hour he sat in the Senate chamber. He showed no evidence of self-consciousness or emotion. And when I thought about the filthy office above the stable 3 years ago, it seemed to me a remarkable illustration of the possibilities of American citizenship. But the most wonderful display of this man's courage and absolute confidence in himself was yet to come. After the procedures in the Senate chamber, Cleveland was taken to the east end of the Capitol to take the oath and deliver his inaugural address. He wore a buttoned Prince Albert coat and slipped his right hand between the buttons while his left remained behind. In this position he stayed until the applause that greeted him subsided. When he began his speech, I expected him to present a manuscript, but that was not the case. And as he proceeded in clear, defined tones without hesitation, I remained astonished, along with 60 million people, yes, with all of civilized society watching. This man had the courage to deliver an inaugural address that made him President of the United States with as much calm and nonchalance as if he were addressing a neighborhood meeting. It was the most remarkable spectacle this country, or any other, had ever witnessed. Believe in yourself. You cannot succeed when others do not believe in you, but never when you do not believe in yourself. John Hunter, still working hard, exclaimed a doctor upon finding the old pathologist at the dissection table. Yes, doctor, and it will be hard for you to meet another John Hunter when I am gone. The heavens take 100 years to form a great genius for the regeneration of an empire, and then rest for 100 years, so it is not surprising that it makes me fear for the Austrian monarchy after my death, said Kunis, who had successfully managed his country's affairs for half a century. Isn't it beautiful to be able to sing like that? Asked Jenny Lind naively to a friend. My lord, said William Peath in 1757 to the Duke of Devonshire, I'm sure I can save this country, and no one else can do it. And he saved it. What seems to us an unpleasant selfishness in others is often just a strong expression of confidence in their ability to accomplish things. Great men often have great confidence in themselves. Worldwood felt certain of his place in history, and never hesitated to say so. Dante predicted his own fame. Kepler said it didn't matter if his contemporaries read his books or not. One can wait a century for a reader, for God waited 6,000 years for an observer like me. Do not be afraid, said Julius Caesar to his frightened pilot in a storm. You are carrying Caesar and his good fortune. When the Directory in Paris realized that Napoleon had become, in 1 month, the most famous man in Europe, they decided to slow his career and appointed his brother as his associate in command. Napoleon quickly but respectfully presented his resignation, saying that a bad general is better than 2 good ones. War, like government, is decided primarily by tact. This decision immediately led the Directory to an agreement. Emperor Francis was very eager to prove the illustrious lineage of his future son-in-law. Napoleon refused to allow the story to be published, saying, I prefer to be the descendant of an honest man than of any insignificant tyrant in Italy. I want my nobility to begin with myself, and all my titles to come from the French people. I am the Rodolphe of Habsburg in my family. My patent of nobility dates from the Battle of Montenotte. When Napoleon was informed that the British government had decreed that he would only be recognized as a general, he said, They cannot stop me from being myself. An Englishman asked Napoleon at Elba who was the best general of the time and added, I think it is Wellington, to which the emperor replied, He has yet to be measured against me. Mature and disciplined talent always has a secure market, said Washington Irving, but it must not be intimidated at home and wait for others to come and find it. Much is said about the success of bold and brazen men, while men of reserved temperament are often neglected, but it often happens that these men ahead possess the precious quality of promptness and activity, without which courage is just an inert property. A barking dog is often more useful than a sleeping lion. Self-respect is the first form in which greatness appears. You can fool everyone sometimes, said Lincoln. You can fool some people all the time, but you cannot fool everyone all the time. We cannot fool ourselves at any moment, and the only way to enjoy our own respect is to deserve it. What would you think of a man who neglected himself and treated his shadow with the greatest respect? Self-sufficiency is a great element of character, said Michael Reynolds. It has won Olympic crowns and Isthmian laurels, conferring a kinship with the men who claimed their divine right to be remembered by the world. Books and success. Ignorance is God's curse. Knowledge is the wing with which we fly to heaven. Shakespeare prefers knowledge to wealth, for one is transient, the other perpetual. If a man empties his purse into his head, no man can take it from him. An investment in knowledge always pays the best interest. Franklin would not exchange my early, invincible reading for the treasures of India. If you placed at my feet the crowns of all the kingdoms of the empire, in exchange for my books and my love of reading, I would refuse them all. Kennan, who among us can say he would have been Sycamore, would never have taught the art that fixes thought into form if Plato had never spoken from his cell, or if his blind harp Homer had never produced vulgarity. When friends drift away and the conversation of intimates languishes into insipid urbanity and commonplaces, these continue only with the unaltered face of happier days and animate us with that true friendship which has never deceived hope nor abandoned sorrow. Washington Irving wants to know how I managed to speak to you in this simple Saxon, asks Robert Cooler. When I was a child, I read Robinson Crusoe and Gulliver, morning, afternoon, and evening. Everything else was schoolwork. These were my delights, along with Bible stories and Shakespeare. When at last the mighty master entered our doors, the rest was like dinner to me. They were like a well of pure water, and it was there that I took the first step that seemed to be of my own will toward the lectern. I clung to it like milk, with no idea of what I was doing. I attached myself to simple words in the very fiber of my nature. There was a day school for me until I was 8 years old. Then I had to go back to work 13 hours a day. From the days when we spelled out Crusoe and old Gulliver, there had grown in me a ravenous hunger for reading. It didn't matter what it was, as long as it was books. A half-volume of an old encyclopedia arrived, the first I had ever seen. I can't imagine how many times I leafed through it. I remember reading a few old reports from the Missionary Society with the greatest delight. There were chapters on China and Labrador. However, I believe that in reading, as in eating, once the first hunger is past, one begins to become a little critical and in no way takes trash if one has a healthy nature. And I remember this because it touches that beautiful valley of the Hudson. I couldn't get home for Christmas in 1839, and I felt a bit sad about it, for I was just a child. Sitting by the fire, an old farmer came in and said, "I noticed you are passionate about reading, so I brought you something to read." It was Irving's sketchbook. I had never heard of this work. I started reading it and felt like those who dream. I hadn't felt such pleasure since the old times with Crusoe. I saw the Hudson and the Catskills welcome poor Rip into my heart as everyone else did. I mourned for Chabot while laughing at him. I thought the old Dutch feast was something admirable, and long before finishing, all the sorrow of my lost Christmas had gone with the wind, and I discovered that there were books and books. This enormous desire to read never left me. If there were no candle, I would pity my head in the fire. I would read while eating, pumping the bellows, or walking from one place to another. I could read and walk 4 miles an hour. The world was focused on books. I thought of nothing good. The good was in reading. I had no more idea of becoming a minister than the ancients who were children, then in this town, had of me being here tonight to tell this story. Well, if a boy is given a passion like this for anything, books, business, painting, agriculture, mechanics, or music, he is given a lever to lift his world and a patent of nobility if what you do is noble. There were 2 or 3 people who thought about books. We became companions and gave them a wide berth to the rustics. Books did their work also on this drink, and fought Al with a more refined fire. In education, said Herbert Spencer, the process of self-development must be encouraged to the maximum. Children should be led to make their own investigations and draw their own conclusions. They should be told as little as possible and urged to discover as much as possible. Humanity has progressed only through self-instruction, and to achieve the best results, each mind must advance a little in the same way. This is continually demonstrated by the success in the market of self-made men. My books, said Thomas Hood, have kept me away from the whirlpool of the tavern dogs and the parlour. Pope and Addison's associate, the mind accustomed to Shakespeare's noble though silent discourse, Milton would scarcely seek or tolerate baseness, poor quality, or slaves. When I manage to make a little money, said Erasmus, I buy books, and if I have anything left, I buy food and clothes. Hundreds of books read once, said Robertson, have passed so completely from us as if we had never read them, whereas the discipline of the mind obtained by writing, not copying a summary of a worthwhile book, fixes it in the mind for years, and also allows one to read other books with more attention and profit. I dare say that this habit of reading, said Troppel, is the step toward the greatest, purest, and most perfect pleasures that God has prepared for his creatures. Other pleasures may be more ecstatic, but the habit of reading is the only pleasure I know that has no alloy. The Bible was initiated in the Arabian desert centuries before Homer sang and prospered in Asia Minor. Since then, millions of books have fallen into oblivion, empires have risen and fallen, revolutions have swept and changed the earth, which has always been the object of criticism and anguish. Powerful men have sought their overthrow. The works of Greek poets who catered to the depraved tastes of men have still perished. The Bible is a book of religion and cannot be judged by any other criterion. Read Plutarch, and the world is a proud place, populated by men of positive quality, with heroes and demigods around us who will not let us sleep, said Emerson. Nor to any vocation that does not allow a man with an inclination to devote a little time every day to the studies of his youth, said Whitenbush. All the park's sport is but a shadow of the pleasure I find in Plato, said Lady Jane Grey in the lap of eternity. I took my place, said Heinsius, among so many divine souls, with such an elevated mind and such sweet content, that I sympathize with all the great men and the rich who do not have this happiness. Death itself does not divide the wise, said Vulgar. You meet Plato when your eyes grow moist over Phaedrus. May Homer live with all men forever. When a man reads, said President Porter, he must put himself in the closest relationship with his author so that all his energies of apprehension, judgment, and feeling can be occupied and excited by what his author provides, whatever it may be. If repetition or revision helps him in this, as it often does, let him not despise or neglect frequent revisions. If the use of the pen for brief or full notes, in keywords or other symbols, will be useful, let him not shrink from the heavy work of the pen and the commonplace book. Reading is to the mind, said Addison, what judgment is to the body, just as, through the one, we persevere, strengthen, and invigorate health, through the other, virtue, which is the health of the mind, is kept alive, cherished, and confirmed. There is a world of science necessary in the choice of books, said Vulgar. I have known people who, with great sorrow, throw themselves on a novel, or the latest light book in fashion. It is like taking a glass of roses for the plague, Light reading does nothing when the heart is truly overwhelmed. I was told that Gautier, when he lost his son, began studying a science that was new to him. Gautier was a doctor who knew what he was doing. When I served young in India, said a distinguished English diplomat, it was the turning point of my life, when it was a mere coincidence that I became a simple card player and hookah smoker. Fortunately, I was stationed for 2 years near an excellent library that opened up to me. Books, says E.P. Guipol, are beacons erected in the great sea of time. Generally speaking, says Benjamin of Israel, the most successful man in life is the one who possesses the most information. One enters society in the broadest sense, says Guicci, in a great library with the enormous advantage of not requiring service and not fearing the repulsions of this great multitude. You can choose the companions you want, for in the silent embankments of the immortals there is no pride, but the highest serve the lowest, with great humility. You can speak freely with anyone without thinking about your inferiority, for books are perfectly educated and do not hurt anyone's feelings with any discrimination. Sir William Weller observed in my study, I am sure I only converse with wise men, but outside it is impossible for me to avoid the company of fools. It is the glorious prerogative of the empire of knowledge, says Webster, that what is gained is never lost. On the contrary, it increases by the multiple of its own power. All its goals become means, all its accomplishments help new conquests. At this hour, 500 years after your creation, says de 15, the tales of Sorza, never equaled on this land by their tenderness and picturesque life, are read familiarly by many in the charming language of their native day, and by others in the modernization of Dryden, Pope, and Worswood. At this hour, 1800 years after their creation, the pagan tales of Ovid never equaled on this land by the joy of their movement and the whimsical graces of their narration, are read by all Christendom. There is no past as long as books live, says Lytton. It is not surprising that if Seren said he would give up everything of value to live and die among his books, says Yeck. It is not surprising that Petrarch was among them until the end and was found dead in their company. It seems natural that Bede died dictating, and that Leibniz died with a book in hand, and that Lord Clarendon, at his desk, uttered the last words of Bull. My poor book speaks of a passion that forgot death, and seemed only an appropriate farewell when a tear ran down the manly cheeks of Scott, as he was carried to his library, for he had returned to Avos Ford to die. Saluted with white hair, a living shadow sitting, caressing and kissing the books he could no longer open or read, it is utterly pathetic. No entertainment is as cheap as reading, no pleasure as lasting, says Mary Wortley Montagu. Good books elevate character, purify taste, remove the attraction of low pleasures, and raise us to a higher level of thought and life. It is not easy to be petty just after reading a noble and inspiring book. The conversation of a man who reads to improve or for pleasure will be uplifted by his reading, but it will not focus on it. Perhaps nothing else has as much power as books to pull the poor from their poverty, the unfortunate from their misery, to make the one bearing a burden forget his load, the hardened his suffering, the afflicted his grief, the oppressed his degradation. They are friends to the solitary, companions to the abandoned, joy to the sad, hope to the unhappy, common sense to the discouraged, help to the needy. They bring light to the darkness and only shadows. 25 years ago, when I was a child, says Reverend J.A. James, a schoolmate lent me an infamous book which he allowed me only 15 minutes to read. At the end of that time, it was returned to me. But this book has haunted me like a spectre ever since. I knelt before God and asked him to erase this book from my mind, but I believe I will carry the spiritual damage I received during those 15 minutes to my grave. Did they ever dream, Homer, Plato, Socrates, and Virgil, that their words would resonate through the centuries and help shape the lives of men in the 19th century? When they were on Earth, they were mere children compared to the powerful influence and power they have now. Every life on the American continent has been influenced in one way or another by them. Christ, when he was on Earth, never exercised a millionth of the influence he exerts today. Although he reigns in few human hearts, he touches all more or less, both the atheist and the saint. On the other hand, who can say how many crimes were committed last year by evil men buried long ago? Their books, their paintings, their terrible examples live in all those they reach and incite to evil actions. How important it is, therefore, to choose the books that must become part of your being. Knowledge cannot be stolen. It cannot be bought or sold. We may be poor. The sheriff may come to sell our furniture or take our cow or our pet lamb and leave us homeless and penniless, but he cannot lay the hand of the law on the jewels of our minds. Good books and wild forests are two things with which man can never become too familiar, says George Wabel. The friendship of trees is a kind of self-love, and it is very healthy. All of inanimate nature is nothing but a mirror, and it is much better to have a sense of beauty than to be only its insensitive bearer. Those who inspire the imagination, whether in truth or fiction, who elevate thoughts, are those who should be read. Our emotions are only the vibrations of our soul. The moment fiction becomes deceitful is bad, for it pushes us to believe a lie. Fiction as fiction must be innocent and beautiful, and its beauty must be more than superficial. Every domain of art is a playground, and we enjoy it more when the artist also makes that playground a gymnasium. Cotton Mather's essay To Do Good, read by young Franklin, influenced his entire life. It advised everyone to read with a pen in hand and take notes on everything they read. James the Fields visited Jesse Pomeroy, the young murderer, in prison. Pomeroy told him that he had been a great reader of bloody and thunderous tales, that he had read 60 dime novels about scalping and other bloody acts, and he believed there was no doubt that these books had put the horrible thoughts in his mind that led him to commit his murderous acts. Many children became explorers for life under the influence of Marietta's novels. Napoleon's Life by Abbott, read at the age of 7, sent a child he knew into the army before he was 14. Many men have committed crimes because of the multiplying influence of a bad book they read when they were children. The chaplain of Newgate Prison in London, in one of his annual reports to Lord, speaking of many young men with good appearances and respectable parentage in the city jail, said that he discovered that all these young men, without exception, had been in the habit of reading these cheap periodicals published for the supposed amusement of young people of both sexes. There is no police court or prison in this country where you cannot find similar cases. One can hardly measure the moral ruin caused to this generation by the influence of bad books. In the parlour window of the mossy vicarage where Coleridge spent his dreamy childhood, there was a very well-copied edition of that volume of Eastern fantasy, 1001 Nights, and he told us with what mixed desire and apprehension he looked at this precious book until the morning sunlight touched it and illuminated it. At that moment, he rushed to triumphantly carry it into a shaded corner of the vicarage garden and plunged enchanted into its labyrinth of wonders and charms. Coleridge said that the works of Ruskin taught him the secret of vision, and no man could ever be the same or look at the world the same way after reading them. Samuel Dufour stated that Locke's essay concerning human understanding opened his eyes and prompted him to resolve to abandon the narrow viewpoints he had been accustomed to. An English tanner, whose leather gained great renown, said he would not have succeeded so well if he had not read Carlyle. The widows of Washington and Henry Klein, whom Lincoln borrowed from his neighbors in the wilderness and devoured by the light of the cabin fire, inspired his life. In his youth, he read Paine's At the Age of Reason and Volney's The Ruins, which influenced his mind so much that he wrote an essay to prove the unreliability of the Bible. These two books nearly unbalanced his moral character, but fortunately, the books that came into his hands in later years corrected this negative influence. The course of many lives, for good or ill, for success or failure, has been determined by a single book. The books we read early in life are the ones that influence us the most. When Garfield worked for a neighbor, he read the Simba the Sailor and the Book of Pirates. These books revealed a new world to him, and his mother had a hard time preventing him from joining the sea. He was fascinated by the maritime life these books described. Captain Cook's voyages led William Carey to go on a mission to the pagans. The Imitation of Christ and A Holy Living and Dying by Taylor shaped John Wesley's character. Shakespeare and the Bible, says John Sharp, made me Archbishop of York, and the Vicar Whitefield awakened Cowper's poetic genius. I was an intimate friend of Leander and Romeo, says Lowell. It seems I chase after Shakespeare and get my intelligence first-hand. Sometimes in my pain, a verse from Spenser slips into my memory as though it has an external vitality and will of its own, like a blast from the distant trumpet of a knight advancing toward the ferry court, immediately lifting me from this sadness and shadow to the light of an old and long-forgotten experience. Amos R. Wells wonders who benefits most from food: the spoiled millionaire, whose tongue is the weary partner of countless sweet, creamy and spicy guests, or the little girl of the worker who walks all morning with a helpful step, having travelled 2 long miles with her father's dinner to share it with him from a tin pail, and who doesn't have more joy than reading? The glutton filled with fiction, her brain packed with disordered fragments of countless adventure, love and tragedy scenes, tired of the same old situations and familiar characters, or the girl who is drawn to the story. For example, who wants to know everything about the old and strange Socrates, then about his friends, then about the time he lived in, how they all lived, and finally the Socratic legacy through the ages? Why does this girl never finish her feast? One can see her contemplative joy with a blessing to the Lord, even of the banquet that ordered all history and arranged that the truth it forges will always be stranger than the fiction man weaves. Take the word of a man who has had a full experience of both readings. Solid reading is all the more interesting and attractive than frivolous reading, just as solid life is more recreational than the frivolous. "I solemnly declare," says Smith, "that if it were not for the love of knowledge, I would consider the life of the most insignificant of the heteros and the knights to be preferable to that of the richest man alive. For the fire of our minds is like the fire the Persians burn in the mountains. It burns day and night, it is immortal, and it cannot be extinguished. From something, it must act and feed on the pure spirit of knowledge or the dirty filth of contaminating passion. Therefore, when I tell you that by directing your understanding, you love knowledge with a great love, a fervent love, a love equal to your life, what am I saying but that you love innocence, that you love virtue, that you love purity of conduct, that you love what, if you are rich and great, would claim the blind fortune that made you thus, and will make men call it justice? Love what, if you are poor, will make your poverty respectable, and make the proudest feel that it is unjust to laugh at the meanness of your fortunes. Love what comforts you, adorns you, and never abandons you, what opens to you the realm of thought and all the unlimited regions of conception, like an asylum against cruelty, injustice, and the pain that might be your lot in the world. Love what will make your motives usually great and honourable, and will light in an instant 1,000 noble scorns at the very thought of meanness and fraud. I want to listen to an eloquent sermon. Sport, Johnny Bisher, Whitefield, Allcooler, Philip Brooks, Canon Farrar, Dr. Parker, Talmash are all standing on my bookshelf, waiting to give me their best efforts. At one point I feel indisposed and need a little recreation. This afternoon I will take a journey across the Atlantic, flying against the wind and above the waves, not fearing seasickness in the ocean's galleys. I will inspect the famous docks of Liverpool, visit Hawarden, see Mr. Glaston, fly to London, tour the British Museum, and see the wonderful collection of all nations. I will walk through the National Gallery of Art, visit the Houses of Parliament, tour Windsor Castle and Buckingham Palace, visit Queen Victoria and the Prince of Wales, wander through the Lake District and visit the great writers. I will visit Oxford and Cambridge, cross the Channel, stop in Rouen, where Joan of Arc was burned by the English. I will take a plane trip to Paris, visit Napoleon's tomb, the Louvre Gallery, glimpse one of the greatest sculptures that exist, the Venus de Milo, which a rich ignoramus offered to buy if given a new one. I will glance at some of the greatest paintings along the miles of galleries, catch sight of the great Opera House, the largest in the world, which demolished 427 buildings to be built. I will stroll through the Champs-Élysées under Napoleon's triumphal arch, go to Versailles and inspect the famous palace of Louis XIV, in which he may have spent $100 million. I wish to listen to eloquent speeches through my books. I can enter Parliament and listen to the exciting oratory of Israel, Claston, Bright and O'Connor. Will they admit me to the full Senate, where I can hear the unmatched oratory of Webster, Clay, Calhoun, Sumner, Everett and Wilson? I will be led to the Roman Forum, where I can listen to Cicero, or to the platforms of Greece, where I can listen, entranced, to the oratorical magic of Demosthenes. No matter how poor I am, says Chanaan, it doesn't matter if the prosperous of my time do not know my humble dwelling, if the sacred writers enter and settle under my roof, if Milton crosses my threshold to sing me paradise, and Shakespeare opens for me the worlds of imagination and the workings of the human heart, and Franklin enriches me with practical wisdom. I will not sigh for lack of intellectual company, and I will become a cultivated man, even if I am excluded from what is called the best society. In the world of the dead there is no rivalry, says Macaulay. In the dead there is no change. Plato is never surly, Cervantes never speculative, Demosthenes never out of season, Dante never stays too long. No political difference can alienate Cicero, no heresy can excite the horror of Vaucluse. Do not pay attention to the meticulous assertion that literary pursuits disqualify you from the active affairs of life, says Alexander H. Everett. Reject it as a mere inconsistent imagination. With principles unsupported by experience, the habit of reading can become morbid. There is a disease of reading novels. Some people are almost as attached to their novels as drunks are to their bottles. The more they read novels, the weaker their minds become. They remember nothing. They read for the stimulus. Their reasoning faculties grow weaker, their memory more treacherous. The mind is ruined for healthy intellectual nourishment. They have no taste for history or biography, nor for anything that is not cheap, sensational, low-quality novels. The passive reception of others' thoughts is not education. Beware of the intoxication and intellectual dissipation. It can be castrating. Beware of the book that does not compel you to decide to go and do something and be something in the world. The great difference between the American graduate and the graduates of English universities is that the latter have not read many books superficially, but a few books well. The American graduate has a little of many books, but he has not mastered any of them. The same is true for readers in general. They want to know a little about everything, want to read all the latest publications, whether good, bad, or indifferent, even if they are new. As a general rule, our minds desire light reading, something to occupy the attention, something to pass the time in the train or at home. As a general rule, the English read more substantial books, older books, books that have established their right to exist. They are not so avid for recent publications. Joseph advises the young to always take notes from their readings. Mr. Cook uses the margins of his books for annotations and marks all his own books with great freedom so that every volume in his library becomes a notebook. He advises all young people, both men and women, to keep reading books. We cannot recommend this habit of taking notes too much. It is a great help for most, and wonderfully helps locate or retrieve for future use what we have read. It helps us to assimilate and make what we read our own. The habit of taking notes during lectures and sermons is excellent. One of the greatest aids to education is the habit of writing an analysis or outline of a book or article after reading it, as well as a sermon or lecture. This habit has transformed many individuals into strong and vigorous thinkers and writers. In this sense, we can only recommend the habit of keeping cuttings from our readings, whenever possible, of everything that may help us in the future. These index cuttings notebooks are often of incalculable use, especially if they are related to our work. Much of what we call genius in great men comes from these notebooks and notes, as well as from clipping albums. How many poor young people who thought they had no opportunity in life have been initiated into noble careers thanks to the great books of Smiles, Todd, Matthews, Muner, Waifu, and others. You must bring your mind to the reading of a book or the study of any subject as you bring an axe to the sharpening stone, not because you get it from the stone, but by sharpening the axe. While it is true that facts learned from books are worth more than the dust of the stone, in an even higher proportion, the mind is more precious than the axe. Bacon says the following: "Some books are to be tasted, others to be swallowed, and a few to be chewed and digested." That is to say, some books must be read only in parts, others must be read seriously, and only a few must be read entirely with diligence and attention. Reading makes a man complete. Conversation or a name makes him alert. Writing makes a man exact. Therefore, if a man writes little, he must have a great memory. If he converses much, he must have a present mind, and if he reads little, he must have much cleverness to seem to know what he knows. Stories make men wise, poetry ingenious, mathematics subtle, natural philosophy profound, morality grave, logic and rhetoric capable of rivaling. Wealth without wings, let it go nobly with the calling to which it has been called. Ephesians 4:1. Abundance is not just material possession, but in a spirit that is not greedy. Zeldom, less money, less worry. Knowing how to do without wealth is to possess it. Reynolds, rich in his own poverty, possesses the greatest treasures of heaven, peace and health. Gray says, "Money has never made a man happy. There is nothing in its nature that produces happiness. The more a man has, the more he wants. Instead of filling a void, it creates one." Franklin says that there are treasures kept in the heart, treasures of charity, piety, temperance, and sobriety. These treasures accompany the man beyond death when he leaves this world. Buddhist scriptures say it is better to acquire wisdom than gold, for wisdom is better than rubies, and all things that can be desired. It cannot be bought with them. It is better to have a cheap coffin and simple funerals after a useful and unselfish life than a great mausoleum after a life without love and selfishness. I must not allow any man through his vast lands to feel rich in my presence. I must make him feel that I can do without his wealth, that I cannot be bought, neither by comfort nor by pride, and that even if I am completely penniless and receive bread from him, he is the poor one by my side. Emerson. I do not want these things, says Epictetus to the rich Roman orator who boasted of his contempt for money, wealth. And moreover, says the Stoic, you are poorer than I. After all, you have silver vessels, but reasons, principles, and appetites of clay. My mind is a kingdom for me, and it provides me with abundant and happy occupation, unlike your restless idleness. All your possessions seem small to you, mine seem great to me. Your desire is insatiable, mine is satisfied. Sir, how many things in the world does Diogenes not need? Exclaimed the Stoic as he walked among the various items at a country fair. One might think that the owner of all these things must be happy, said Boswell. No, sir, replied Johnson, all this merely excludes one evil, poverty. What has life left behind, asks the crowd when a man dies. But the angel who receives him asks, what good deeds have you sent before you? What is best to possess? Asked an ancient philosopher of his students. One of them replied, nothing is better than a good eye, a figurative expression for a liberal and cheerful disposition. Another said, a good companion is the best in the world. A third praised a good neighbor, and a fourth a wise friend. But Eleazar said, a good heart is better than all. Certainly, said the master, you have understood in 2 words everything the others have said. For he who has a good heart will be content, will be a good companion, a good neighbor, and will easily see what ought to be done. My kingdom for a horse, said Richard III of England in the midst of the Battle of Bosworth Field. My kingdom for a moment, said Queen Elizabeth on her deathbed, and millions of others, when they felt that the earth, its riches and its power were slipping from their hands, clearly showed that deep in their hearts they valued these things as nothing when they were truly compared to the blessed light of life, to the stars and flowers, to the company of friends, and above all to the opportunity to grow and develop here and prepare for the life to come. Queen Caroline Matilda of Denmark wrote on her prison window with her diamond ring, "Oh, maintain my innocence, make others great. These jewels are my treasures," said Cornelia to the Campanian lady who asked to see her gems, proudly pointing to her children coming home from school. The response was worthy of the daughter of Scipio Africanus and the wife of Tiberius Gracchus. The most precious production of any country is its harvest of men. "Get rid of your treasures," said a tyrant. "No, I cannot," was the reply. "For first of all, I have none that you know of. My treasure is in heaven in my heart." There are some people who are born happy regardless of their circumstances. They are cheerful, content, and satisfied with everything. They carry a perpetual feast in their eyes and see joy and beauty everywhere. When we meet them, they impress us as if they have found something lucky or as if they have good news to share. Like bees that extract honey from all flowers, they have a happy alchemy that transfigures even the sadness of the sun in the sick room. They are better than the doctor and more powerful than medicine. All doors open for these people. They are welcome everywhere. We create our own worlds and populate them, while memory, the scribe, faithfully records the account of each as we pass through the milestones that mark the way. We are therefore not responsible for the inhabitants of our little worlds. We should fill them with what is true, beautiful, and good, for we are endowed with the faculty of creation. Genius, says White, can almost be defined as the faculty of acquiring poverty. It is the talented men who make money with the work of genius. Someone is right to say that the greatest works are those that have earned the least for their authors. They were beyond the reach of appreciation until it arrived. There is an Eastern legend about a powerful genie who promised a beautiful lady a rare gift if she crossed a cornfield without stopping, turning back or moving, selecting the biggest and most ripe ear. The value of the gift would be proportional to the size and perfection of the ear she chose. She crossed the field seeing many ears worthy of being harvested, but always hoping to find a larger and more perfect one. She passed them all, and so arrived on the other side without selecting a single one. A man can earn millions and still be a failure. Earning money is not the greatest success. The life of a wealthy businessman was not truly successful. He had only one ambition: to strike his soul in dollars. The all-powerful dollar was his sun and reflected in his heart, suffocating all other emotions and silencing all nobler aspirations. He clung to his wealth until he was struck by the scythe of death, when in the blink of an eye he transformed from one of the richest men who had ever lived in this world to one of the poorest souls who had ever left it. Lincoln always aspired to complete integrity of character, and his fellow lawyers perversely called him excessively honest. Nothing could induce him to take the wrong side of a case or continue on that side after he knew it was unjust or hopeless. After spending considerable time on a case where he had received an advance of $200 from a lady, he returned the money, saying, "Madam, you don't even have a leg to stand on in your case, but you have earned this money," said the lady. "No, no," replied Lincoln. "That would not be right. I cannot accept payment for doing my duty." Agassiz did not want to give lectures for $500 a night because he did not have the time to make money. Charles Sumner, when he was a senator, refused to give lectures at any price, saying that his time belonged to Massachusetts and to the nation. That is why he did not want to speak for 50 nights in America at $1,000 a night, because he said he could do better. He could stay in London and try to save 50 souls. All honor to the few comparatives in all the paths of life who, amid the strong materialistic tendencies of our time, still speak and act seriously, inspired by the hope of rewards distinct from gold or popular favor. These are our truly great men and women who work in their ordinary vocations with no less zeal because they devote time and think about higher things. King Midas in the ancient myth asked that everything he touched turn to gold, because then he thought he would be perfectly happy. His wish was granted, but when his clothes, food, drink, the flowers he picked, and even his little daughter whom he kissed turned to yellow metal, he begged to have the golden touch removed. He had learned that many other things are inherently far more precious than all the gold extracted from the earth. The beggar Homer, who wandered God knows when through the childhood and barbarism of the world, was richer than the Rothschilds, the Vanderbilts, and the Golds. An Arab who narrowly escaped death after getting lost in the desert without provisions recounts his feelings when he found a sack full of pearls just as he was about to give up all hope. "I will never forget," he said, "the taste and pleasure I felt when I thought it was dry wheat, nor the bitterness and despair I felt when I discovered the sack contained pearls." It is interesting to note at this time of money accumulation that a poor author, a shabby artist, or a university president with frayed sleeves has more prestige in society and has more paragraphs written about him in the newspapers than many millionaires. This may be due to the malign influence of money accumulation and the beneficent effect of purely intellectual activities. In general, any great success in the world of money means the failure and misery of hundreds of antagonists. Any success in the world of intellect and character is an aid and benefit to society. Character is a mark engraved on something, and this indelible mark determines the only true value of all people and all their work. Dr. Hunter said that he had never known a great man who wanted to become one. Artists cannot avoid putting themselves and their own character into their works. The vulgar artist cannot paint a virtuous picture. The coarse, the strange, the sensitive, the delicate, these all emerge on the canvas and tell the story of his life. Who would not choose to be a millionaire in shares with a Lincoln, a Grant, a Florence Nightingale, or a Shields? A millionaire in ideas with Emerson, Lowell, Shakespeare, Woodward. A millionaire in statistics with Gladstone, Bright, Sumner, Washington. Some men are rich in health, in constant joy, in a mercurial temperament that makes them float above troubles and trials, enough to sink a boat filled with ordinary men. Others are rich in disposition, family and friends. There are men so lovable that everyone loves them, some so cheerful that they bring an atmosphere of joy around them. Others are rich in integrity and character. Who is the richest of men? The one who is content with the minimum, for contentment is nature's wealth, Socrates said. "Do you know, sir," said a devotee to John Bright, "that I am worth £1,000,000? "Yes," replied the interlocutor, irritated but serene. "I know, and I know that's all you're worth." A bankrupt merchant coming home one evening said to his noble wife, "Darling, I'm ruined. Everything we have is in the hands of the sheriff." After a moment of silence, the wife looked him in the eyes and asked, "Will the sheriff sell you?" "Oh no, the sheriff won't sell me, will he?" "Then don't say we've lost everything. Everything that is most precious remains ours. Adulthood, femininity, childhood. We've just lost the fruits of our skill and industry. We can make another fortune if we're left with our hearts and hands." "It is said that a man is made," says Bisha. "What do we mean by that?" "That he has succeeded in mastering his lower instincts so that they fuel his higher feelings, giving strength to his nature. That his affections are like vines sending flowers and fruits in all directions. That his tastes are so cultivated that all beautiful things speak to him and delight him. That his intelligence is open, so that he roams all the halls of knowledge and collects its treasures. That his moral feelings are so developed and vivified that he maintains a sweet communion with heaven. Oh, none of this is cold and dead in heart, mind, and soul. Only his passions are alive. But he is worth $500,000, and we say that a man is ruined." "Have his wife and children died?" "Oh no, they haven't fought and been separated from him. Has he lost his reputation through crime? Has he lost his mind? Isn't he as healthy as ever, unaffected by illness? Has he lost his wealth and is ruined? The ruined man. When will we learn that a man's life does not consist in the abundance of the goods he possesses?" "How is it possible," asks an ancient philosopher, "that a man who has nothing, who is naked, homeless, skeletal, without a slave, without a city, can pass a life that flows easily? Look, God sent you a man to show you that this is possible. Look at me, I who am without a city, without a house, without possessions, without a slave. I sleep on the ground. I have no wife, no children, no courtroom, but only the earth and the sky, and a poor coat. And what do I want? I am not without trouble. I am not without fear. I am not free. When have you seen me fail in my desire or even fall into something I would rather avoid? Have I ever blamed God or men? Have I ever accused a name? Have you seen me with a troubled look?" "You are a plebeian," said a patrician to Cicero. "I am a plebeian," replied the great Roman orator. "The nobility of my family begins with me. Yours will end with you. No man deserves to be crowned with honors if his life is a failure. And he who lives only to eat, drink, and accumulate money surely has not succeeded. The world is not better for his life. He has never wiped a tear from a sad face, never lit a fire in a cold hearth. There is no flesh in his heart. He worships no god but gold because he fights for a little portion of this earth. This is my world now. Why should I envy another's legal possession? It belongs to the one who can see it and enjoy it. I do not envy the so-called owners of properties in Boston and New York. They only take care of my property and maintain it in excellent condition for me for a few railroad cents. As long as I desire, I can see and possess the best of all of it. It has cost me no effort, it gives me no worry. Yet the green grass, the bushes and statues in the grass, the finest sculptures and paintings inside are always ready for me when I have the desire to contemplate them. I don't want to bring them home because I could not give them half the care they receive now. Besides, I would spend too much precious time worrying about whether they are deteriorating or being stolen. Now, I have a great part of the world's wealth. Everything is prepared for me without any effort on my part. All those around me strive to obtain things I like and compete to see who gives them for the least. The little I pay for the use of libraries, railroads, galleries, parks is less than it would cost to take care of the least of everything I use. Life and landscape are mine, the stars and flowers, the sea and the air, the birds and the trees. What more do I want? All ages have worked for me. All humanity is at my service. All that is required of me is to eat and dress, an easy task in this land of opportunity. There is no idea more infectious or more powerful than the love of money. It is a yellow fever that decimates its followers and ruins more families in the country than all plagues or diseases combined. All readers can see examples of its evil power. Almost every square meter of land on our continent during the first buccaneer period, what some call the March of Civilization, was bled by the madness of treasure. Read the pages of our historian Prescott, and you will see that all of America's anti-Puritan history is summed up in a horrible massacre for gold. Discoveries were just secondary matters. Speak, history. Who are the victors of life? Unroll your long parchment and say, the winners are those who reached the finish line first, without caring for the rights of a brother. Lost in the great race of life, is the one who stopped to lift a fallen child and put them back on their feet, or to help an unconscious comrade, or to guide or assist a weak woman. Who stopped in the thunder when duty calls, or pain, or distress. There is no one to sing the poem of the defeated who fell in the battle of life. What about the wounded, the defeated who died overwhelmed in the struggle? The low and humble, the tired and broken hearts, who fought and failed in the eyes of men, but did their duty as God showed them. Have we not yet seen a man who has entirely relied on his character and eaten the food of angels? Asked Emerson. Who, trusting his feelings, has found life made of miracles, and who, working for universal goals, has found himself nourished, not knowing how, clothed, sheltered, and armed, and although he didn't know how, he did it with his own hands. At a time when it was considered dangerous for ordinary people in European society to read books and listen to lectures on subjects other than religious ones, Charles Knight made it his mission to enlighten the masses with cheap literature. He believed that a newspaper could be informative without being boring, inexpensive without being harmful. He created the Penny magazine, which achieved a circulation of 200,000 copies in its first year. Knight planned the Penny Cyclopedia, the Library of Entertainment, Noble's Half Hours with the best authors, and other useful works at an affordable price. His entire adult life was dedicated to uplifting ordinary people through cheap but wholesome publications. He died in poverty, but a grateful public erected a noble monument on his ashes. How many rich dwellings are torn from all kinds of luxuries that are nothing but glittering caves of selfishness and discontent? It is better to have a meal of herbs where there is love than a stopped ox, and hatred within it. No man can know whether he is rich or poor by consulting his account book. It is the heart that makes a man rich. He is rich or poor according to what he is, not according to what he has, said Bichet. If our thoughts are great and noble, no petty environment can make us miserable. It is the spirit that makes the body rich. No matter the situation, it seems to me that it is alone noble to be good. Benevolent hearts are more than crowns, and the simple faith that blood commands us. Tennyson says, "Be noble, and the nobility that resides in other men, asleep but never dead, will rise with majesty to meet yours." Lowell.